targeted Obama-Clinton policies as failures.
We must not be afraid to define our enemy. Islamic extremist terrorism.
With a surprise visit by the candidate.
It is my great honor to present the next First Lady of the United States.
Donald J. Trump is ready to serve and lead this country as the next President of the United States.
Day 2 of the Republican National Convention continues now.
Good evening and welcome to our special PBS NewsHour NPR coverage of the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. I'm Judy Woodruff.
And I'm in a very loud hall, Gwen Ifill, on the second night, as we will be all this week, joined by NPR's Rachel Martin, just across the arena from us on the podium, and in the anchor booth with us, syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks.
Also with us, NPR's national political correspondent Mara Liasson, along with Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. And down on the floor, we have NewsHour correspondent Lisa Desjardins and NPR congressional reporter Susan Davis.
The Republican Party formally nominated Donald Trump as their candidate for president tonight, and we'll be right back to start it all off after a short break. Stay with us.
Funding for this program is provided by
XQ Institute.
BNSF Railway. Lincoln Financial, committed to helping you take charge of your financial future. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome back. We're here with our political team as the Republican Party kicks off its second night of the 2016 presidential nominating convention. The official and ceremonial roll call vote is underway. It's going through a slight pause, as you can hear the music behind me. But the goal, and in fact, it already has formally made Donald Trump the Republican Party's candidate for president. But there has been some division as some delegates refuse to give up the fight. The state of New York cast its vote to push Donald Trump over the number needed to win the nomination. And Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., marked that announcement.
And it is my honor to be able to throw Donald Trump over the top in the delegate count tonight with 89 delegates and another 6 for John Kasich. Congratulations, Dad. We love you.
New York, 6 votes Kasich, 89 votes Donald J. Trump.
So that happened about an hour ago, but they are still in the process of figuring out the final count. This is a musical interlude behind us. We know tonight's convention is supposed to be all about projecting a sense of party unity. We're going to be hearing from some major figures in the party, even while several have opted not to come here to Cleveland. We are going to hear from New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, House Speaker Paul Ryan, among others. We'll also be hearing from 2 of Donald Trump's children, and we are expecting an appearance by the candidate himself. So we've got a lot to talk about, Gwen, and I think, Amy, I want to come to you first because we were just discussing this. At this point, the RNC, the Republican Committee, wanted to have this count over with and bye-bye. We're now in prime time.
We're now in prime time, and there's still some objection that I can't quite figure out exactly. It involves the Alaska delegation. But the one thing we do know at this point is, while Donald Trump has indeed gone over the top, he won the nomination, that more votes have been cast, more delegate votes have been cast against his nomination than at any point since 1976. So he has, there count, this last count, is about 476 opposed. So that's an interesting milestone to remember, and I think it's something we're going to keep coming back to throughout this campaign. It's a party that is trying to figure out its identity, a party that's trying to decide if it wants to be united around Donald Trump, and a party that we're going to see tonight still figuring out how to thread the needle between protecting the people on the ballot in the House and the Senate, while also seeing what's going on the top of the ticket.
David Brooks, this is one of the things that amazes me about this convention so far. They have a plan. They lay it all out, exactly who's going to speak and when and how this is going to work. And it's all designed to make Donald Trump look good. And then something happens which throws them off, whether it's about the debate about Melania Trump's speech last night or just the ability to do a formal roll call tonight.
Yeah. We've been sort of teetering on the edge of incompetence sort of all this since we got here, from the beginning of the floor fight yesterday, as you said, Melania Trump. The weird thing that happened after the Trump speech last night when they had a whole nother agenda that bleached into like 11:45 at night, as far as we know. It could be still going on. I don't know. And so it's just not a professionally run convention, or it's not a seamless one. And that's in part because they didn't let the normal people at the RNC know what was going on. You didn't have the normal professionals planning this thing. You had a very small group of people in the Trump campaign who are not that practiced. And so something will happen tonight. I don't know what it'll be, but I guarantee you something will happen tonight.
Mark Shields, how significant is it, what Amy said? This is the largest number of delegates not voting for the nominee since 1976, when Gerald Ford was challenged by Ronald Reagan.
Judy, I think it's a reflection of the climate. I mean, he's a very controversial candidate. It's a hostile takeover of a party. He has taken the party and changed its positions ideologically on trade, on immigration, and he's done it, and he's won it. So there is resistance, and there is support for other candidates. There are people who are convinced that he is the apocalypse waiting for them. There are others who believe he is the hope of the Republican Party to reach out to working America, to middle-class America. But the Republicans just have a favorite slogan, which if you haven't met a payroll, you shouldn't hold office. If you can't run a convention, it's a pretty tough argument to make you can run a country. And they're having a problem running this convention right now.
This hostile takeover idea, Mara, it seems odd to start a convention just the second night with so much pessimism about how it's going. Is there anything good that's happened here?
Well, yes. I mean, if the goal, they had a goal, and the goal was they believe that voters are angry and fearful enough to turn to a strong man to fix everything. And their goal is to eviscerate Hillary Clinton relentlessly night after night. They did it last night. From the advanced copies of the speeches that we've gotten already, they're going to do it again tonight. And if the goal of the convention is to convince voters that when they look at Donald Trump, they see a president, and this convention should also fix his weaknesses, shore them up, tonight they have a lot of work to do, because last night was almost exclusively about Hillary Clinton, with the exception of Melania Trump. Tonight's theme is Make America Work Again, so you'd think the lineup would be chock full of business people attesting to Donald Trump. Instead, what you're going to hear from is a lot of Republican elected officials, the ones who chose to come here, as opposed to staying away. And what I'm watching for is how much do they talk about Donald Trump, and how much do they try to protect their own ranks in the House and Senate. Right.
Let's go to the floor, because they're just announcing the final numbers, and they're about to have a party.
Nominee for President of the United States.
The final number that I overheard them talking about for Donald Trump was 1,725, if I'm not mistaken, and someone can correct me, but hundreds more for other candidates as well, including, I think, 465 for Ted Cruz.
Right. And a number for Marco Rubio, and John Kasich got a few as well. Amy, we should take note that Donald Trump does have the big majority here tonight.
And it also is a reflection of just how competitive and fractured this race was from the very beginning, where you had, Donald Trump winning this race by a plurality and winning, again, enough of the vote in a very fractured field to be able to come here as the nominee.
We are now about to go to Mitch McConnell, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, who's about to take...
Is he getting booed?
I think I'm hearing some booing.
Seems to be booing his announcement, actually. This is Mitch McConnell, House Speaker. Paul Ryan preceded him.
Vice President of the United States. The chair states that in compliance with Rule 40B, the chair has been furnished with evidence that a majority of the delegates from each of 8 or more states severally support the candidate who will be presented for the nomination for Vice President of the United States. The chair would like to remind delegates of the provisions of Rule 40A, which provide that, in part, if there is only one candidate for nomination for Vice President of the United States who has demonstrated the support required by paragraph B of this rule, a motion to nominate for such office by acclamation shall be in order, and no calling of the roll with respect to such office shall be required. At this time, the chair states that he has been furnished with evidence that there is only one candidate for nomination for the office of Vice President who has demonstrated the support required under Rule 40B of the Rules of the Convention. Delegates and alternates, the chair recognizes and is pleased to introduce the Honorable Eric Holcomb, Lieutenant Governor from the state of Indiana. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Mr. Chairman, delegates, and guests of the 2016 Republican National Convention, tonight I have the high honor of placing into nomination the name of a man I have known for decades, and a man America is just getting to know. I already know his head. I already know where his heart is. In Indiana, some know Mike Pence as congressman. Others know him as governor. But back home, most call him Mike. As you just heard, I serve as Mike's lieutenant governor, but more importantly, he and Karen are 2 of my dearest friends. Together we've stood side by side as our state has shown the world how common sense, conservative leadership can balance budgets while at the same time cutting taxes every single year he's been in office. And while at the same time making record investments in public education and increasing our children's test scores. In Indiana, under Mike Pence, more Hoosiers are working now than at any time in our 200-year history. And our tech sector is experiencing explosive record growth. In Indiana, Mike Pence doesn't just cut red tape, he eliminates it. And that is one reason why Indiana is recognized as having the best business climate in the Midwest and the 5th best business climate in America. It is exactly that type of leadership our country is lacking, and exactly the type of leadership Americans will send to the White House this fall with Donald Trump and Mike Pence. These 2 leaders are not just prepared to win, they are prepared to govern. Mike likes to say that Indiana is a state that works. And tonight, America is calling on him to expand that success to make America work again. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the great state of Indiana, I proudly nominate a great man of integrity, a proven conservative, an incredible husband and father, and one of my best friends. I nominate the great governor of Indiana, Mike Pence, as the Republican Party's 2016 candidate for Vice President of the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you.
That was the Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, who's likely to replace Mike Pence once he, if he is elected vice president. This is, and even if he isn't, because he can't run for governor again.
It's an election.
That's right.
Yeah,
There's got to be an election. But
Didn't sign up.
But we also have a lot going on the floor tonight. Lisa Desjardins is down there for us, and I want to she bring us up to date and how we came to this dramatic outcome. Lisa.
That's right. You know, in essence, this nomination was always going to happen when you looked at the number of delegates that Donald Trump won according to state rules. But Gwen and Judy, in the last hour, it's been marred by some of these state delegations saying they do not think their vote count was correctly reported or counted by the Republican Party. If you look right behind me, you'll see a large group huddling under the Alaska banner. The state of Alaska, their delegation chairman reported how the state voted, but on the podium, the Republican Party changed those vote counts. They say that's because of the state's own rules. The state party, they say, this is the vote for acclamation for Mike Pence, by the way. And that is the Republican convention voting by acclamation to make Mike Pence the vice presidential nominee. This should be a great big moment for the Republican Party, but as I say, you have delegations here scratching their heads saying, we thought we voted one way, and the Republican Party saying, no, we voted another. Utah is another example. We could get into the complicated math about all this, but what's happening is Alaska is now seeing if they have a legal challenge here. I'm told by the state of Utah they may not challenge. They're shrugging their shoulders, but we have delegates who are not happy in what should be a big moment for the party. Gwen, Judy?
Well, Lisa, it does raise some questions about whether this count is official or not. They said he's over the top, but then we go on to find out that some states are challenging what's going on. We are going to take a short break. Our coverage of this special... We're going to keep going. We're not going to take a break. But it does raise these questions, David, again, about what's going on tonight.
We're 17 to 20 minutes into prime time, and they're still doing procedural stuff with Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell gets up on the podium and he's get booed. I mean, that's kind of amazing. I mean, I said something would happen. I didn't think it would happen this early.
Yeah, I remember interviewing him about, I don't know, a month ago about all this. And at one point I asked him, do you think Donald Trump is fit to be president? And he said, the American people will decide that. I said, Senator, what do you think? He said, the American people will decide. He said it 3 times in a row. It isn't the ringing endorsement the Trump people are looking for.
He's been even more reticent than Paul Ryan has. Paul Ryan has endorsed Donald Trump. He points out over and over again all the ways that he and Donald Trump are different kinds of conservatives and how they differ on things. He's called Trump's rhetoric racist. But Mitch McConnell has been very, very reserved and very critical about Donald Trump's behavior and lack of discipline.
So, you know what? I'm sorry. I didn't
okay. Go ahead.
Interrupt you. Finish your thought.
No, I'm just saying that's why I can't wait to hear what he says tonight. Is it going to be a ringing endorsement, or is it just going to be an attack on Hillary?
Let's talk a little bit about the final numbers for Amy. In the end, this is what we just saw. Mike Pence nominated, acclamation, no problem. This is what happened with the numbers for Donald Trump. He ended up with 1,725 delegates, but Ted Cruz had 475 delegates. John Kasich of Ohio, not even stepping foot in the arena this week, 120 delegates. And it went on like that. Rubio got more than 100 delegates. That's hundreds of people, of delegates sent here by their home states who declined to vote for the guy who's the nominee.
Right. And in some states, you're bound on the first ballot for the person that won your state, so that's reflected in those numbers as well. But it just goes to show, I think, how we forget how contentious that the primary process was. And in fact, Pew Research has done some good look at this week, looking at how fluid the race for president was, that Donald Trump started this race with a very key group of supporters, but it was very small. And as the race went on, people came with him, fell off, and so this was never, usually in the race for the nomination, it's a really straight line from this person's the front runner to this person gets the nomination. This was a very windy trail, and look, up until we hit, I can't remember what date that was, that we were still
Indiana,
talking
Ted
about,
Cruz.
yeah,
Yeah.
but we were still talking about unbinding delegates. We were still talking about Never Trump. The Never Trump hashtag is going to continue even after this campaign ends.
Which is exactly what the Trump campaign was telling us was not going to happen this week. They were saying that they had worked it all out at the rules and the platform committees and all those other committees that met last week, Mark. They made it sound like, well, there may be a little bit of noise when we get to the convention, when we're actually in the convention, but look what's happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're off schedule. That's the biggest thing of all, and it does not appear to be an organized. But the big moment was, of course, Wisconsin. That was the last time that Donald Trump lost a major battleground state. Ted Cruz won it. Ironically, two of the prominent speakers tonight are Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, an embattled Republican incumbent, and the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who is basically distancing himself from Donald Trump while embracing him. It's a balancing act. But after Wisconsin, it was clear sailing.
Yep.
He did not lose again. I mean, so he had an effect, a momentum coming into this convention, which was really quite impressive. More impressive, actually, than Hillary Clinton's was going into the Democratic convention.
Let me ask you guys a question. We just saw what happened when Mitch McConnell walked out on the stage. This was not his big formal appearance tonight. But if this were to happen again, if he were to get, but why does he walk out and get booed? And House Speaker Paul Ryan, in his first appearance today at the beginning of the roll call, got cheered. Is it because he was the vice presidential nominee, or is it just that he's maneuvered through this a little bit better?
Well, I think Paul Ryan is seen as a young conservative reformer. I think Mitch McConnell is seen as more of the establishment. And don't forget, Donald Trump's campaign was a revolt against the Republican establishment. He vanquished them one by one. And they didn't want him, and they didn't want him up until the end. And that's why you don't see the two living former presidents here, or Jeb Bush, or many, many, many other members of the Republican establishment.
But you do see senators. I mean, we heard from Jeff Sessions, the first senator to endorse Donald Trump last night, and others. We're hearing from some members of Congress. Mark?
Yeah, no, Donald Trump in the most recent Wisconsin poll, the Marquette University poll, is 29% favorable, 63% unfavorable. And Paul Ryan is the only Republican in that state that has favorable rating. I mean, so I think he's generally regarded in the party as a positive and attractive and appealing figure with ideas. And as Mara pointed out earlier, here he is, okay?
No, that's not him speaking.
But he contrasts himself. I think the two conflicting elements here are the two, David would argue with me, the strains of conservatism. There's the 5 minutes to midnight conservative. Things are bad, they're going to get worse. And we heard a lot of that last night. Or the Ronald Reagan, Jack Kemp, and to some degree Paul Ryan, 5 minutes to sunrise conservative. Yes, things are bad, but they're going to get better. And it's going to be a better tomorrow.
What I don't understand, Mark or David, is who's winning that fight? Because there seems to be a true fight going on about.
There's no question that
Midnight is winning. No doubt about that.
Big last night.
Yeah. And Pat Buchanan was the John the Baptist here, and he was running years ago, and he was for a closed party, closed borders, closed trade, not super dynamic business. Let's create a lot of wealth.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons we see the fighting here is because of a tectonic shift in the party. If Trump goes away at whatever point, it's going to remain still a closed party, I think. A little more socially conservative than Donald Trump is, but it's going to be an anti-immigration, closed free trade, and a lot of people are not comfortable with that. And we're hearing from them tonight. As Mark is speaking, we have a screen behind Mark with some of the seats in the arena.
Kind of empty.
And they're empty. Those seats are empty. And if you look up the top tiers, those seats are empty because there are a lot of people, whether they were lobbyists or they're fine folk, they're not showing up here, and there's a lot of emptiness here.
But you know what's interesting? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
just saying, David has clearly made a conclusion. I happen to agree with him that there is such a thing as Trumpism. It's not just Trump. He's not a black Swan event, some kind of unique billionaire reality TV celebrity that we'll never see the likes of again. I mean, this party is changing, and one of the things that Republicans have to decide is it just Trump who did this hostile takeover and maybe one day he'll be off the scene, or is it that their party has changed? And I think their party has changed.
And I think the faces of these delegates are the faces of the Trump Republicans. I mean, it is frankly mostly white. It is, there are some younger people here. For many of them, it's their first convention, Amy. But this is a Trump reflective convention. And yes, there are non-Trump delegates. But these people are the folks who agree with him on immigration, on building the wall.
Well, and
so
on whether they believe that it's midnight or it's not midnight.
Exactly.
And in fact, there was some polling done earlier this summer that asked, how angry are you about the way things are going in this country? We heard a lot of anger last night. Among Republicans who said they were pro-Trump, 52% said they were very angry. But among Republicans who said they weren't for Trump, it was only 14% that said they were very angry. Democrats were at the same number, at 19%. So you can see that there is the strain of the party that is here is not reflective of the entire party. And I think one other important thing about the unity that we forget about, I think Donald Trump, to Mark's point, it is true. He came out with a big momentum out of winning all of those northeastern states and then closing the deal in Indiana. And his polling was starting to reflect that. It looked like the party was coming together. He got a big bounce. And then what happened? He went on the attack after the judge. And that has redefined him, and it redefined this race. And that also broke, so the unity is really very fragile.
But here's my question. We talk about the party, and we talk about the convention. But who's leading? Who's leading the horse to the water to drink, I guess? Is it that Americans or Republican Americans or conservative Americans are really very angry here and therefore this party is responding to them? Or that the party is angry and is dragging mainstream Republicans along?
I think the base of the party is angry and they were receptive to Donald Trump. One thing, what Amy's talking about, what Donald Trump did at the moment of his greatest victory when he vanquished the establishment, he went on a rampage against this Mexican judge who turns out to be an American. And this convention is reflected of that same kind of indiscipline. No one plays a winning hand worse than Donald J. Trump.
All right, we are watching what's going on the floor. Our own Lisa Desjardins is there talking to some delegates in the Alaska delegation. Go ahead, Lisa.
That's right, Judy. I'm with the chairman of the Alaska delegation, also the chairman of the Alaska Republican Party, Tuckerman Babcock. You also told me this is your very first convention, in the very first hours of your first convention. Can you tell me what happened as you reported what you believe to be your votes for president and the response from the Republicans on stage?
Yes, Alaska voted in March, Alaskans, and the proportionate vote was 12 for Cruz, 11 delegates for Trump, and 5 for Rubio. And that was worked out at our state convention very peacefully, very respectfully, and that's how we arrived here as a delegation. That's what I reported as the delegation chairman. The RNC apparently interpreted our rules differently, as Reince Priebus announced, but they didn't talk to us. So we had no idea they were going to interpret our rules differently.
Do you think that interpretation is correct?
Our rules used a very inarticulate wording. We said, as long as you haven't dropped out, you stick with your vote, your bound delegates. No one drops out, they suspend. But we don't use that word.
In the end, am I correct that the total, as counted by the Republican Party, favored Mr. Trump more than the total that you reported?
No.
Oh, no. Good.
No. Our vote was exactly the same. It was 12 for Cruz, 11 for Trump, and 5 for Rubio. But they did not apply our rules. They insisted their interpretation of our rules.
When they interpreted it, there were more votes for Mr. Trump, is what I'm saying.
28 were for Trump.
Yes, exactly. Correct. That's what I'm saying. Now, I want to ask you, though, this convention goes on. Your nominees have been officially selected. What does this make you and your delegation think about the Republican Party?
Oh, we're still delighted with the Republican Party. I mean, we have a strong party in Alaska. We're behind Donald Trump. We don't want Hillary Clinton elected. It's bad for Alaska. Rules can be misinterpreted, and I think they misinterpreted them, but I'll bow to the vote we got to say how we voted. Our people got represented, and that's what counts.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Tuckerman Babcock with the Alaska Republican Party. Gwen, Judy?
Lisa Desjardins, thank you for bringing us that information on the floor. That's an interesting thing. Bad feelings and about rules and about what happens inside the party doesn't translate into not voting for Donald Trump. I just want to reintroduce the circle here. Mara Eliason from NPR, Amy Walter from the Cook Political Report, Mark Shields from the syndicated columnist, PBS NewsHour, and David Brooks from the New York Times. So maybe is there a danger, David, in over-interpreting floor fights into being a sign that the party is fractured?
Well, first, I'm struck by this is a party that believes in state control and devolving power down to the states, except for when it hurts the storyline, in which case the center will control. So I do think two things are happening. People in this room are Republicans. A lot of them have spent their life in the Republican Party. Their identity is Republican. And a lot of them are here supporting Donald Trump, not because they love him, because they love the party.
Right.
And so those two things can happen in tension, that they can be ambivalent about Trump, depressed about him at 3 o'clock, sort of impressed by 4 o'clock, depressed again at 7. But then they're still Republicans, so that's some glue there.
I think most of us feel that way about our jobs often. Not us, of course.
We should mention, while we're talking about a little dissension, I guess you could call it some fighting in the Republican Party, not so sure how serious it is. At the podium is Dana White, who is the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. In other words, that's the mixed martial arts promotional company. We want to listen to him for just a minute?
Listen to him.
Let me tell you 3 things that I respect about this man. First, Donald has great business instincts. He supports businesses of all sizes. He'll make it possible for them to grow and succeed, which is the backbone of a strong economy. Second, Donald is a hard worker. This guy's going to get up there. He's going to roll up his sleeves. He will work with people, and he will put in the time to get things done. Third, for over 15 years, Donald Trump has been a loyal and supportive friend. And I know that if I needed Donald, he would be there for me, just like he was when I first met him. He's one of these guys that sometimes he'll pick up the phone and he'll call me and say, hey, good luck with the fights tonight. I'm going to be watching, or whatever it is that we might have going on. And he always reaches out to me when something has happened in my career. Back in 2011, we signed this huge network television deal with Fox, and they did a big write-up in the New York Times. Donald took that paper and he wrote on the front and said, congratulations, Dana, I always knew you were going to do it. Just for the record, Donald has nothing to do with my business. We're not in business together. His interest in me and my business are personal. And in my opinion, you can really tell a person's true character when they're happy for somebody else's success, okay? And I think that sense of loyalty and commitment will translate into how he will run this country. And let's be honest, folks, we need somebody who believes in this country, we need somebody who's proud of this country, and who will fight for this country. Let me tell you something. I've been in the fight business my whole life. I know fighters. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump is a fighter, and I know he will fight for this country. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
That is Dana White, the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and obviously a big supporter of Donald Trump, mostly because he thinks he's a pretty good fighter too.
Well, we must add, Gwen, that Trump hosted several Ultimate Fighting Championship events at the Trump Taj Mahal back in 2000.
Of course he did. We now sit back to the stage for Governor Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas.
And we don't need Hillary Clinton in the White House. I have been in the public arena during the administration of 6 presidents, from federal prosecutor under President Reagan to Congress, the DEA, and then Homeland Security after 9/11. I have seen America at its best, and I have seen America put to the test. There has never been a more urgent time for leadership. America's strength and boldness are desperately needed on the world stage. And a new energy is demanded at home to build our economy and to defeat terrorism. Strength, boldness, and new energy are not words that describe Hillary Clinton. This is the same Hillary we knew in Arkansas and later in Washington for so many years. Hillary always wanted more government, and her dreams have only gotten bigger. Regretfully, she offers more of the same uncertain leadership in fighting terrorism, the same failed top-down approach to health care, where Washington tells the states what to do, the same nanny state regulations that strangle the economic strength of America. If you like the last 8 years, then Hillary will give you double for your trouble. But good things are happening in the states. In Arkansas, we are creating...
Asa Hutchinson was also a member of Congress, something he doesn't mention so much, Mark, in his resume, but he is doing the job of what folks want to do tonight, which is talk about Hillary Clinton as much as Donald Trump.
That's exactly right.
Mark Shields, sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. When Asa was elected to Congress in 1996, was a reform Republican. There were reform Republicans, and then obviously went on to serve in the administration of President Bush. But the interesting thing is he first backed Mike Huckabee, not surprisingly, Arkansas governor. Then he backed Marco Rubio. And he said about Donald Trump this spring, I do not see his discussion of issues as serious. The words are frightening. How you're going to build a wall, how you're going to have Mexico pay for it. What does this mean? Let's be realistic in our discussions, how we discuss these issues with the American people. So it's not a testimonial and tribute to Donald Trump. Again, we're hearing the indictment of Hillary Clinton more than anything else.
And we're going to hear more from Arkansas. After Governor Hutchinson speaks, we're going to hear from Arkansas's Attorney General. Her name is Leslie Rutledge.
Yep.
She's not up yet. But I think
Bill Clinton used to be Attorney General of Arkansas, just saying.
That's exactly right. And we may hear a little bit more about both. About both Clintons. Mara Larson, I'm reminded that NPR has been doing a series of interviews with Asa Hutchinson, sort of following the trajectory of his opposition to Donald Trump and what's become acceptance.
I bet you could find quotes for a lot of people who were speaking tonight when they had things, as Mark has done his homework, about what they said about Donald Trump before. And it's really hard to make the pivot to now giving a full-throated endorsement of Donald Trump. I think what Asa Hutchinson is doing right behind us is talking a lot about Hillary Clinton and very little about Donald Trump.
Isn't that true of so many elected officials this year, even the ones who have reluctantly come around to Donald Trump, is that they realize that's just their choice, that this is the choice?
Well, defeating Hillary Clinton is the unifying force of this convention, and opposition to the Clintons is bred in the Republican DNA for the last 25 years, but that is what's holding this convention together. That's something every one of these people can agree on.
Which brings me, Amy, to a question about, these are the two nominees, the most negative, the nominees with the highest negative perception on the part of the public of any, I guess, since polling started. So can you add to the negatives? I mean, Hillary Clinton's are high, Donald Trump's are higher. Are they trying to get hers up to where his are?
That would then be the two highest that we've ever seen in modern political time. But no, I think that the goal of a convention like this should be to try to lessen his negatives, not to try to pump hers up any more than they already are. Those are pretty well settled. And I don't know that anything we've seen thus far is doing that.
As we were just mentioning, Leslie Rutledge, the Arkansas Attorney General, is about to speak now. She was just elected in 2014, and she is the first woman and Republican elected to this position. So let's see what her role is tonight. Let's take a listen.
Hillary Clinton speaks with a New York accent, sometimes an Arkansas accent. But y'all, this is what a real Arkansas woman sounds like. Hillary may not know where she's from, but Arkansans know exactly who she is. Arkansans know who I am. Raised on a cattle farm, married to a row crop farmer. And I'm a Christian, pro-life, gun-carrying, conservative woman. And I'm the first female and first first Republican elected Attorney General of Arkansas. The very same office Bill Clinton held when those two launched their careers of corruption. Hillary says when they left the White House, they were poor. And while they've made millions, she's still poor in all the ways that really count. Poor judgment, poor policies, and poor decisions. Hillary is a lawyer, but she acts like the law doesn't apply to her. Absolutely no good could have come from merging her public service with her private interest, much less her private server. What we know about her scandals is bad. What we don't know may be worse. Why did Bill's speaking fees skyrocket as soon as she became Secretary of State? Why did donors to the Clinton Foundation receive favorable treatment from the State Department? Deception and dishonesty are all second nature to Hillary. As my daddy likes to say, Hillary will lie even when the truth would serve her better. I broke a glass ceiling. I know the importance of doing so, but a historical milestone need not come at the expense of America. Unlike Hillary, Donald Trump knows that women and men are not single-issue voters. We care about jobs, the economy, and national security. I know this race will shape the Supreme Court for generations. Do we want the late Antonin Scalia to be replaced by a liberal activist judge? Donald Trump will nominate conservative justices who will uphold the Constitution, support the rule of law, and rein in out-of-control federal bureaucrats. Frankly, Hillary needs to go to her own house and not the White House. And she can take Ruth Bader Ginsburg with her. My fellow Americans, it's time to update your resumes because Donald Trump is growing jobs, and with a Trump presidency, America will be closed to overregulation and open for business. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Leslie Rutledge, the Attorney General of Arkansas, and proving that she is what Arkansas looks and sounds like. I get the feeling we're going to be hearing from her a bit more. David?
She fills the screen. She had good lines. She was witty. She's a dynamic presence, a little more than Asa Hutchinson, to be honest.
Well, I think we now know that she carries a gun.
Michael Mukasey was Attorney General of the U.S. from November 2007 to January 2009, and he's going to pick up on the Clinton bashing theme of the evening. Here he is.
Why she should not be President of the United States. But how she treated and what she did with government secrets when she was Secretary of State, and what she said about what she did, both before and after she got caught, exquisitely sums up the case against her presidency. She sent and received secret and top secret and beyond top secret information and emails on an unsecure private email system instead of on the secure government system. And she did it without authorization. She said, falsely, that there was no classified information. She said, falsely, that what she did was authorized. And what else did she say? She said, and these are her words, "When we traveled to sensitive places like Russia, we often received warnings from department security officials to leave our Blackberries, laptops, anything that communicated with the outside world on the plane with their batteries removed to prevent foreign intelligence services from compromising them." And then she added, falsely, "Even in friendly settings, we conducted business under secret security precautions, taking care when and how we read secret material and used our technology." That's from her book, which is entitled, ironically, Hard Choices. Hard choices indeed. In reality, we now know that she chose to use her private email overseas in countries that were hostile to the United States and that have sophisticated hacking capability. Although her system was so remarkably primitive, the FBI couldn't figure out whether or not it had been hacked. We do know that the emails of people she communicated with were hacked. So I guess about her emails, we're soon going to hear the same infamous question that we heard about the death of 4 Americans in Benghazi. What difference at this point does it make? Well, Secretary Clinton, it makes a big difference. The United States is the only country in the world that was founded based not on blood or land, but based on a law, the Constitution. Hillary Clinton is running for an office, the presidency, whose powers and duties are defined by that law. The most important power that that law gives the president is to be commander-in-chief of the armed forces to protect the country. That law imposes really only one substantive duty on the president, and that is, as written in the Constitution, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That law, the Constitution, specifically requires that before taking up those powers and duties, the president swear to an oath, and it's the only oath that's set forth in the Constitution, to faithfully execute the office and to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Hillary Clinton took a similar oath before she became Secretary of State. You know what that adds up to? What that adds up to is that Hillary Clinton is asking the people of this country, the people of the United States, to make her the first president in history to take the constitutional oath of office after already having violated it. The message from this convention to everyone watching these proceedings, and the message to her, should be loud, clear, and short. No way, Hillary. No way on earth. Thank you very much.
Tough language from the Attorney General who served at the end of the George W. Bush administration, saying, unlike what the Justice Department has said under President Obama, that Hillary Clinton did not do anything deserving of punishment, that she absolutely did. And David Brooks, we just heard Michael Mukasey say she would be the first president to take the oath of office who'd already violated the oath.
Yeah, though that was super tonally different from everything else we've been hearing tonight. It was like we had a UFC cage match, and suddenly Bernard Baruch walks on stage. It's like a total different change. But I think we should look at this from a public choice perspective. You're an individual person coming up on stage, and you're thinking about your long-term career. What are you going to do? And we have seen a lot of Arkansans tonight. And Tom Cotton is a rising star from Arkansas, a senator, Arkansas, it's sometimes called. And Ben Sasse is a rising star from Nebraska. And they took opposing points of view. Ben Sasse, anti-Trump, anti-Trump, anti-Trump. Tom Cotton, mostly a little pro-Trump, but a lot of anti-Hillary. And this will be like the Iraq War vote. History will judge politicians by how did they take the Sass route, the Cotton route, the Giuliani route. And we're seeing a lot of people position themselves in a way that will affect them for decades. And everybody up at that podium is doing exactly that.
Speaking of the podium, we have NPR's Rachel Martin down there for us now, and she's talking to one of the speakers from last night, Pastor Mark Burns.
I'm down here on the podium with Pastor Mark Burns of South Carolina. He gave the benediction the other night, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for being with us.
So honored to be here.
Why is Donald Trump your candidate?
Well, Donald Trump is a man that runs on three main principles that are dear to my heart. Number one, he has declared early that he is a friend of Christians, and that Christianity will have a friend in the White House. Our religious liberties are under attack, and so he will be a champion for our religious liberties. Number two, he understands that poverty knows no color. So jobs are so important to this country. Bringing jobs back to this country, giving people in urban areas an opportunity to do great in their life and to raise up the economic value of their life. And number three, ISIS knows no color. Terror, security, our borders need to be strengthened, and he's going to be the person that fit all three.
You have been pretty public about the fact that your own congregation has been rather divided over Donald Trump. Why do you think he's such a polarizing figure?
Well, I think he has captured the heart of millions of voters in this country because he has been saying he is saying publicly what millions of Americans have been saying privately. He is one of the first candidates ever to be bold enough to say the things that has been dear to Americans' hearts. And now, for the first time, we have a champion who has been the voice of the silent majority that is speaking, getting beyond the political correctness of politics, but really dealing with issues to the heart of the matter so we can come up with real solutions.
But many of the things he says strike people the wrong way, even in your own congregation. How do you make the case to your own friends and family that he is the candidate to vote for in November?
Well, two things. Number one, he's the only candidate, I believe, that's really standing for Christian liberties. As a pastor, you only have two options. One candidate, Hillary Clinton, who is putting a muzzle on Christian liberties. Barack Obama has done it for 8 years, and Hillary Clinton will be a third-termer.
What happened? Sorry for that abrupt ending. Sorry for that abrupt ending of Rachel's interview with the pastor. We've been hearing from South Carolina. Now we have Sue Davis on the floor. She's been talking to New York Congressman Peter King. Susan.
Hi, I am here with Congressman Peter King, a Republican from New York, the state that put Donald Trump over tonight for the nomination. Congressman, you are one of the Republicans in Congress who chose to be here tonight. Why did you want to be here in Cleveland?
Well, first of all, I'm a Republican. Donald Trump is the nominee of the party. I'm a New Yorker. He's a New Yorker. I mean, I've had differences with Donald Trump. He was not my first choice, but he's the nominee. He's my final choice. And I'm going to, on every key issue, I would be much closer to him than Hillary Clinton. It's a choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. I believe on Supreme Court appointments, national defense, homeland security, and also support for police. Donald Trump is much closer to my position than Hillary Clinton.
Do you think that that's how a lot of Republicans are thinking of their vote? It's not as much a pro-Trump vote as it is an anti-Hillary Clinton vote?
I would say people in this hall, it's pro-Trump. I think in the election, you're going to find there is a strong hostile vote against Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump will have to take care of that, take advantage of that. Having said that, he's going to win it on his own, and obviously Hillary Clinton's weaknesses, he has to exploit them, but in the final analysis, he's got to show that he's qualified to be president, and I'm confident he will.
Donald Trump wants to win New York. Hillary Clinton is from New York. How competitive how competitive can New York be in a general election?
Well, if it comes down to the real New Yorker, it's Donald Trump. Hillary's still from Illinois or Arkansas or somewhere. But as far as I think New York can be in play. I mean, I'm not not kidding ourselves. It can be tough. But having said that, I've seen polling where she's barely over 50%. Upstate New York, the Democrats are very unpopular there. On Long Island, the polls I've seen have shown Donald Trump beating Barack Obama. Then it comes down to New York City. Heavy Democratic city, but if Trump could put together the Bloomberg-Giuliani coalition, then it can be won. He can certainly put it in play.
All right, we hear from Peter King. New York could be put in play by Donald Trump. Thank you for talking. Have fun tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for giving us the tee up to the perfect question that we're going to bring to the table. We're here now. That was Sue Davis from NPR. I'm also here with Mara Liasson from NPR, Amy Walter from the Cook Political Report, Mark Shields, the beloved Mark Shields, and David Brooks from the New York Times. And let me just say, we just heard what Peter King said optimistically about being able to get New York, and we've heard Californians say the same thing about Donald Trump. Yeah? What's the consensus at the table?
Probably not. At least in New York, upstate New York fits into the Trump theory of the Rust Belt and the industrialized Midwest, and that is the path, if he has one, to go to the White House, because he'd boost white-collar, blue-collar white voters so much that he could flip some of those blue states red. That's their theory.
Yeah, not that he wouldn't dearly love to win his home state.
Well, of course, but the idea is to do that, there aren't enough blue-collar white men to do that. You have to get, if you're going to get 70% of the white vote, which is what people estimate he'd have to get to win, you also need some white women. And this convention, I thought, was supposed to help him do that.
So, Amy, are there some places where Donald Trump could pull off a state or so?
Well, here are the places that Barack Obama carried that I think Donald Trump will do better in and could win. States that even Obama did really well in, like Iowa, where you could argue that Donald Trump is going to do much better there. It's obviously a much whiter state than any of the other battleground states. It's also a state that Hillary Clinton has not traditionally done very well in. So I think what we're going to see, the map is probably going to look pretty much the same in terms of which the competitive states are, the battleground states. Maybe Arizona gets put in the mix, a state that's gone Republican over and over again, but it gets more competitive. But in terms of the states that Donald Trump flips, that Obama carried, I think where I would look for states that are overwhelmingly white, have a very populist undertone to them, where that message really resonates, and where you don't have a big city with suburbs surrounding it. So New Hampshire, Iowa, those are the kinds of places. But that's how many votes? That's 7 electoral votes. No, 9 electoral votes, okay? Guess where he's not going to do as well as Mitt Romney or John McCain? Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. They have a lot of electoral votes.
So, David, where is the path? Maybe it's too soon to get there, but let's assume that there's a path coming out of this convention.
Well, there's an obvious path. I mean, it's the only path he have, which is to win Pennsylvania, even though it's got a lot of big cities, to win Ohio, to win Wisconsin, Michigan, I guess.
Yeah, you'd have to do all that.
Iowa.
Yeah, Iowa. He'd have to do all that in the heartland. It's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah.
I keep going back to something Amy referred to. If you're sitting there at the convention and you're thinking, what is my goal here? Is it to make people who hate Hillary hate her really, really, really a lot? Or is it, well, maybe there's another Donald Trump out there that hasn't been seen yet?
Yeah.
And to me, option B is just a lot better. But that's not the option we've seen so far.
And we have not seen it so far. But quickly, before we leave this, Mark, when was the last time a nominee really did upset the traditional apple cart of states for his
Obama.
party?
Mm-hmm. Obama expanded the election.
Obama did expand the play. I would say that Ohio, Michigan. I mean, Hillary Clinton is weaker in Michigan than traditional Democrats are. And I'd also add, Judy, that he is a certain not unreputable, but saying for Donald Trump is not considered in polite company some places to be acceptable. And I think Donald Trump has shown in the past, and could very well in a general election show what is called voting booth strength. That is, Ronald Reagan ran 16 points higher on election day than he'd run in the last poll when he was running for governor of California.
Well,
he ran stronger and president.
We didn't see that through the primary.
I know, but we're going to have to pick up this conversation on the other side, because we have to take a moment to acknowledge our special PBS NewsHour and NPR coverage partnership of the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Stay with us.
Hillary Clinton will never even think about Donald.
This is Rachel Martin down on the podium, and it is day 2 of the Republican National Convention here in Cleveland. Yesterday, the theme was Make America Safe Again. Tonight, it's Make America Work Again. But the opening of the evening began in a different way. We heard from the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, Dana White, who's known Donald Trump for a long time, and obviously that hits a pop culture chord. His message, Donald Trump is a fighter, he will fight for you. But really, when you look at this itinerary tonight, this agenda, you're going to hear from a lot of establishment Republicans. House Speaker Paul Ryan, Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, their goal to make it clear Donald Trump can unify the party. Stay with us. This is special coverage from PBS NewsHour and NPR News.
If you are just joining us, this is live coverage of the Republican National Convention from NPR and the PBS NewsHour. I'm Judy Woodruff.
And I'm Gwen Eiffel. We were just talking before we went to this break about what happens in polite company with Donald Trump, Marshfield.
Yeah.
I feel like we're in one of those rooms where the company is very polite and people are saying very enthusiastic things about Donald Trump, Mara Liasson, but I'm not certain those two things necessarily meld.
Well, one of the things that Mark was raising, and this has been talked about a lot, is the hidden vote for Donald Trump. In other words, you're not going to tell a pollster you'll vote for him, but you will in the privacy of the voting booth. This is the reverse Bradley effect. When Tom Bradley polled great, he was African-American, trying to be the first governor of California, first black governor of California. And then when they got in the booth, they didn't want to vote for an African-American. But if that's true, the polls should have underestimated his support all through the primaries, and they didn't. They were pretty accurate.
That's Republican.
You're saying the hidden vote is among independents.
I'm saying yes, independents, Democrats, blue-collar Democrats, Pennsylvania, Ohio. I mean, I just think there is a Donald Trump, and I think there's a resistance. Remember this, Hillary Clinton is the second most unpopular presidential nominee in the history of modern polling. Donald Trump is the first most unpopular. So, I mean, this is a race that is not clearly defined by any means. I think it's still very much in front of us.
Amy, is there a way to get at that in polling, to get at what somebody really means, really thinks, when you ask them who they're going to vote for, who they like?
Well, when you have a majority of Americans now saying they're casting their vote against someone rather than for someone, you have a pretty volatile situation there. But you also have two very well-known people. I mean, this is what's different about this campaign and about these conventions than we've had in previous years, where the soon-to-be nominee wasn't particularly well-known, and here's the chance to show them to the nation. They get their first opportunity to really tell America their story. Well, everybody knows Hillary Clinton. They've known her for 25 years, and we sure know a lot about Donald Trump. And to the point that everyone around this table has been making, what we've been hoping for, or hoping we would see at some point, is a different story about Donald Trump.
But you know, even though we think everyone knows Donald Trump, there are millions of people watching this that haven't paid any attention up until now, even with the obsessive and overwhelming news coverage that Donald Trump has gotten. And what I thought we were going to see tonight, maybe we still will, the theme was Make America Work Again. This was supposed to flesh out his actual economic agenda, something more detailed than I'll build a wall or I'll make America great again. Many hours to go.
You know, earlier today, Judy and I both sat down with former Republican Party chair and Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour to talk to him about just these issues.
Haley Barbour, welcome to this special program.
Thank you, Judy.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Gwen.
You've been saying for some time that these are the two most negatively perceived presidential nominees in a long time, and you've said in the last few days that we're going to see a lot of good things about Donald Trump that we didn't know before. What are we learning that's positive about Donald Trump so far at this convention?
Of course, last night the program was almost entirely about national security and terrorism, and not so much about him. I think tonight a lot about the economy, and it'll be a lot of personal talk from people who've worked with him, worked for him, as well as you'll hear Republican politicians and that sort of stuff talk about the economic issues. But when you look at this, I have to just say it's not the two most negatively perceived in recent years. It's the two most negatively perceived politicians, nominees in the history of polling. We've never had this before. And the other thing in Poland that is just unbelievable to me that I never could imagine, more than half the people after the FBI announced that they were not going to recommend her indictment, more than half the people in every poll said they thought she ought to be indicted. I mean, can you imagine? I've known you a long time. I've never imagined anything like that.
Governor Barbour, you have been around, as you pointed out. You've been around the block a couple of times. You ran the Republican National Committee, governor of Mississippi. You just mentioned how Hillary Clinton should be indicted, or might. Some people are suggesting that she might be indicted. You didn't endorse Donald Trump until May. Is this convention about getting Donald Trump elected or defeating Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think for most people in the United States, this is a binary choice. But most people have a negative opinion of both.
We're sorry to interrupt our interview with Governor Barbour. We've got a special video from Donald Trump. Let's go to the floor.
Live.
Very special day. Watching my children put me over the top earlier. The party seal, I mean, what we did, getting the party's nomination, I'll never forget it. It's something I will never, ever forget. A little over 1 year ago, I announced my candidacy for president, and with your vote today, this stage of the presidential process has come to a close. Together, we've achieved historic results with the largest vote total in the history of the Republican Party. This is a movement, but we have to go all the way. I'm so proud to be your nominee for President of the United States. I look forward to sharing my thoughts with you on Thursday night on how we build a brighter and more hopeful future for all Americans. It's an honor to run on a ticket with Governor Mike Pence, who is an incredible man and who will make a great, great vice president. I'll be with him in Cleveland tomorrow night, and we'll be together again on Thursday night. And by the way, we are going to win the state of Ohio. And also, of course, we're going to win the presidency and bring real change and leadership back to Washington. This is going to be a leadership, by the way, that puts the American people first. We're going to bring back our jobs. We're going to rebuild our depleted military and take care of our great veterans. We're going to have strong borders. We're going to get rid of ISIS. And we're going to restore law and order. We have to restore, and quickly, law and order, among many and just so many other things. And I'll be discussing with that Thursday night. We'll be talking all about it. But together, most importantly, we are going to make America great again. Have a fantastic evening. I'll see you tomorrow night. I'll see you on Thursday night, and we will win in November. Thank you.
Pretty mild.
That's Donald Trump from the 26th floor of Trump Tower, New York. He says he's going to be here every night of the convention, which is kind of a different way of running a convention, but he's a different kind of candidate. More boos now as we see Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, come out to give his speech tonight. It happened when he walked out last time and again.
I've been around a while, and I've been around the Clintons more than anybody should ever have to be. A couple of years ago, Bill and Hillary camped out in my state, telling anyone who'd listen why they ought to vote against me. Tonight, I'm here to return the favor. I'm a patient man. As a young child in the South, I was struck with polio and forced to stay off my feet for 2 years. That experience taught me an abiding gratitude for my parents. And it also taught me how to wait, which comes in handy when you're the leader of the U.S. Senate. More than anything, though, my job has taught me the value of trust, how to distinguish between people who are in this to serve others and people who are in it for themselves. I'm here to tell you Hillary Clinton will say anything, do anything, and be anything to get elected president, and we cannot allow it. The American people are tired of hearing about the bounty of government while the cost of caring for a family or meeting daily expenses grows out of reach. Over the past few years, they've seen government abuse their office and get rewarded for it. They've seen the middle class actually shrink. And in the midst of this, they've raised a very simple complaint. Who's looking out for us? It's not Hillary. I've had my differences with Barack Obama, but I'll give him credit for this. At least he was upfront about his plans to move America to the far left. To the far left. Not Hillary. She lied about her emails. She lied about her server. She lied about Benghazi. She even lied about sniper fire. Why, even she lied about why her parents named her Hillary. So I ask you a simple question. At a moment when so many feel betrayed by their government, why in the world would Democrats put forward such a candidate? Hillary has changed her positions on so many times, it's impossible to tell where the conviction ends and the ambition begins. In 2010, she said Iran could enrich uranium. In 2014, she said she's always argued against it. Once a backer of the Keystone Pipeline, last year she opposed it. She used to be against sanctuary cities, then she claimed she was for them, and now we're not sure where she is. Friends, not since Baghdad Bob has there been a public figure with such a tortured relationship with the truth. Fortunately, there's a clear choice before us, and it's not Hillary. You know what the next 4 years will look like with Hillary, and you know that if Hillary is president, we'll continue to slide, distracted by the scandals that follow the Clintons like flies. 2 years ago, voters delivered a clear verdict on the Obama years by sending a freshman class of rock star Republicans to the Senate and delivering us a majority that I promised to make you proud of. We'd never hesitate to confront the president, but we'd also do the hard work of tackling urgent problems head on. And we delivered on that promise. We put Obamacare repeal on the president's desk. He vetoed it. Donald Trump would sign it. We passed a bill to finally build the Keystone Pipeline. Obama vetoed it. Donald Trump would sign it. We passed a bill to defund Planned Parenthood. Obama vetoed it. Donald Trump would sign it. And on that sad day when we lost Justice Scalia, I made another pledge that Obama would not fill this seat. That honor will go to Donald Trump next year. So with Donald Trump in the White House, Senate Republicans will build on the work we've done and pass more bills into law than any Senate in years. We've already passed the first major education reform in more than a decade and ended Common Core. We made the first significant reforms to Social Security in 3 decades. We passed a crucial cybersecurity bill. We imposed sanctions on North Korea. We passed the first major highway bill in more than a decade. We passed a bill to combat the scourge of human trafficking. And just last week, we passed the first major law aimed at confronting the heartbreaking explosion of heroin and opioid abuse. So my friends, keep the Senate in Republican hands and we'll continue this work. And the remarkable public servants that I'm proud to lead in the Senate will not let you down. But put Hillary Clinton in the White House, and I promise you this, she will double down on the cynical approach that Senate Democrats seem to revel in these days. Here's what I mean. As we sit here tonight, a terrifying mosquito-borne illness threatens expectant mothers and their babies along our southern coast. And just last week, Clinton Democrats in the Senate blocked a bill aimed at eradicating that virus before it can spread. And they weren't finished. They blocked a defense funding bill, a bill that would support the brave men and women who are right now defending us overseas. What in the world do these people think public service is about? I don't know, but I know this. If Hillary Clinton is our president, nothing will change. So tonight I ask you to continue. Let us continue our work. Let us put justices on the Supreme Court who cherish our Constitution. Let's keep the Senate. And let's elect a president and a vice president who really believe America is exceptional. Thank you, my friends, and God bless America.
The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell didn't get exactly a rousing welcome. In fact, there were some boos when he stood up to speak, but he delivered what they wanted to hear. He said of Hillary Clinton, she lied about her emails, she lied about her servers, she lied about Benghazi, and so it went. Rachel Martin of NPR is down near the podium. Rachel, are delegates talking about Mitch McConnell?
You know, this was kind of a tough moment for the Senate Majority Leader, wasn't it? Because it's been no secret that he's had a difficult relationship with Donald Trump over these many months during this campaign. As you mentioned, he was booed when he came out onto the stage. As he was speaking, delegates were walking around, pretty much just ignoring him until he mentioned the name Donald Trump. That got an applause line. But you know, then he really pivoted in the speech and made this far less about Donald Trump than he tried to make it about Democrats, and really trying to raise the stakes by mentioning the Supreme Court nominations that could be in play. So this is less a rousing endorsement for Donald Trump and more for Mitch McConnell about those down ticket races. Back to you, Gwen.
Rachel, we have one more question for you. When we saw that very brief little live shot from Donald Trump, the person everybody here has come to see, were people paying a little closer, more enthusiastic attention when he was on the screen?
Oh, sure. You know that every time Donald Trump is either on the stage or on the screen, he commands attention. So it doesn't matter, even if it's a video message. People were transfixed. I mean, as you mentioned, Donald Trump has said he is going to be around. You know, he's kind of breaking protocol by popping up every now and then. And they have intimated that they want to keep people a little bit on their toes, that there are some surprises in store. And so I think we're probably going to see a little bit more of him in different forms throughout the rest of the convention.
Rachel, one final question. Is this delegate vote count over or not? I mean, there's some question about some states that were challenging the results. Is that the end of it? Do we know?
Who knows at this point, Judy? I mean, as we saw earlier, Alaska demanded a recount. They said, we don't like how you are interpreting our state rules. We didn't cast all our delegate votes for Donald Trump, yet the RNC has kind of implemented this rule, and they ended up casting those votes for Donald Trump. Alaska's not happy about it. There are other states who are kind of thinking about whether or not they want to make a bigger fuss over this. In the end, it doesn't matter. Donald Trump is going to be, he is the GOP nominee, but it does say something about the tension right now between the RNC and the states, and that Never Trump movement, which is, you know, it's been dead many times, but there's still a lot of people in this hall who are not pleased about how that turned out.
NPR's Rachel Martin for us on the podium tonight. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Back up here in the Sky booth, our very luxurious digs, we are surrounded by welcoming Ron Elving from NPR, who's joining us for this hour, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report, the lovely and wonderful and stylish Mark Shields, and every time I introduce you, I'm coming up with something new, and David Brooks of the New York Times. You know, right as we're talking, we have a collection of people from Congress on stage saying, we need to hold on to Congress, which we didn't really get. We also heard from Mitch McConnell, but that doesn't get big applause, David Brooks.
Well, why?
Why is that?
Well, people are not exactly happy with Congress, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. But second Congress for what? The people up here who are speaking are inhibited because they can't really lay out a projected vision for the future because a lot of them disagree with large elements of Donald Trump's vision for the future. And so Clinton's what they got.
We're going to go to, speaking of Congress, the House Speaker, Paul Ryan. Let's listen for a minute.
Let me thank all of the people of this beautiful city for looking after us this week. And above all, I want to thank the men and women who are here from law enforcement for your service. You know, standing up here again, it all has kind of a familiar feel. Students of trivia will recall that last time around I was your nominee for vice president. It was a great honor. It was a great honor even if things didn't work out quite according to the plan. Hey, I'm a positive guy. I found some other things to keep me busy. And I like to look at it this way. The next time that there's a State of the Union address, I don't know where Joe Biden or Barack Obama are going to be, but you'll find me right there on the rostrum with Vice President Mike Pence and President Donald Trump. Democracy is a series of choices. We Republicans have made our choice. Have we had our arguments this year? Sure we have. You know what I call those? Signs of life. Signs of a party that's not just going through the motions, not just mouthing new words for the same old stuff. Meanwhile, what choice has the other party made in this incredible year filled with so many surprises? Here we are, at a time when men and women in both parties so clearly, so undeniably want a big change in direction for America, a clean break from a failed system. And what does the Democratic Party establishment offer? What is their idea of a clean break? They are offering a third Obama term brought to you by another Clinton. And you're supposed to be excited about that. For a country so ready for change, it feels like we've been cleared for takeoff and then somebody announced we're all going back to the gate. It's like we've been on hold forever, waiting and waiting to finally talk to a real person, and somehow we've been sent back to the main menu. Watch the Democratic Party convention next week. That 4-day infomercial of politically correct moralizing. And let it be a reminder of all that is at stake in this election. You can get through 4 days of it with a little help from the mute button. But 4 more years of it? Not a chance. Not a chance. Look, the Obama years are almost over. The Clinton years are way over. 2016 is the year America moves on. From now to November, we will hear how many different ways progressive elitists can find to talk down to the rest of America. To tell the voters that the Obama years have been good for you, that you should be grateful, and well, now it's Hillary's turn. The problem is really simple. The problem here is very simple. There is a reason people in our country are disappointed and restless. If opportunity seems like it's been slipping away, that's because it has. And liberal progressive ideas have done exactly nothing to help. Wages never seem to go up. The whole economy feels stuck. And millions of Americans, middle-class security is now just a memory. Progressives like our president like to talk forever about poverty in America. And if high-sounding talk did any good, we'd have overcome those deep problems long ago. This explains why, under the most liberal president we have had so far, poverty in America is worse, especially for our fellow citizens who were promised better and who need it most. The result is a record of discarded promises, empty gestures, phony strawman arguments, reforms put off forever, shady power plays like the one that gave us Obamacare, constitutional limits brushed off as nothing, and all the while, dangers in the world downplayed, even as the threats go bolder and come closer. It's the last chapter of an old story. Progressives deliver everything except progress. Yet, we know better than most. We know better than to think that Republicans can win only on the failures of Democrats. It still comes down to a contest of ideas, which is really good news, ladies and gentlemen, because when it's about ideas, the advantage goes to us. Against the dreary backdrop of arrogant bureaucracies, pointless mandates, reckless borrowing, willful retreat from the world, and all that progressives have in store for us, the Republican Party stands as the great enduring alternative party. We believe in making government, as Ronald Reagan said, not the distributor of gifts and privilege, but once again the protector of our liberties. Let the other party go on making its case for more government control over every aspect of our lives, more taxes to pay, more debt to carry, more rules to follow, more judges who just make it up as they go along. We, in this party, we are committed to a federal government that acts again as a servant, accountable to the people, following the Constitution, and venturing not 1 inch beyond the consent of the governed. We in this party offer a better way for our country, based on fundamentals that go back to the founding generation. We believe in a free society, where aspiration and effort can make the difference in every life, where your starting point is not your destiny, and where your first chance is not your only chance. We offer a better way for America with ideas that actually work. A reformed tax code that rewards free enterprise instead of just enterprising lobbyists. A reformed healthcare system that operates by free choice instead of by force and doesn't leave you answering to cold, clueless bureaucrats. A commitment to a renewed commitment to building a 21st century military and giving our veterans the care that they were promised and the care that they earned. And we offer a better way for dealing with persistent poverty in this country. A way that shows poor Americans the world beyond liberal warehousing and check writing, into the life everyone can find with opportunity and independence. The happiness of using your gifts, and the dignity of having a job. And you know what? None of this will happen under Hillary Clinton. Only with Donald Trump and Mike Pence do we have a chance at a better way. And last point. Let the other party go on and on with its constant dividing up of people. Always playing one group against the other, as if group identity were everything. In America, aren't we all supposed to be and see beyond class, see beyond ethnicity, or all these other lines drawn to set us apart and lock us into groups? Real social progress is always a widening of the circle of concern and protection. It's respect and empathy overtaking blindness and indifference. It's understanding that by the true measure, we are all neighbors and countrymen, called each one of us to know what is right and kind and just, and to go and do likewise. Everyone is equal. Everyone has a place. No one is written off, because there is worth and goodness in every life. Straight from the Declaration of Independence, that is the Republican ideal, and if we won't defend it, who will? So much that you and I care about. So many things that we stand for in the balance in this coming election. Whatever we lack going into this campaign, we should not lack for motivation. In the plainest terms I know, it is all on the line. So let's act that way. Let's act that way. Let's use the edge we have because it is still what earns the trust and the votes. This year of surprises and dramatic turns can end in the finest possible way when America elects a conservative governing majority. We can do this. We can earn that mandate if we don't hold anything back, if we never lose sight of the stakes, if we never lose sight of what's on the table. Our candidates will be giving their all. They'll be giving their utmost, and every one of us has got to go and do the same. So what do you say? What do you say? What do you say that we unify this party? What do you say that we unify this party at this crucial moment when unity is everything? Let's take our fight to our opponents with better ideas. Let's get on the offensive and let's stay there. Let's compete in every part of America and turn out of the polls like every last vote matters, because it will. Fellow Republicans, what we have begun here, let's see this thing through. Let's win this thing. Let's show America our best and nothing less. Thank you, and God bless.
When Mitt chose him.
Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, getting the crowd to rally about unity and actually getting them on their feet and to pay attention for probably the first time tonight. We have NPR's Sue Davis, who's on the floor in her day job. She covers Congress, and perhaps she can give us a little background on how Paul Ryan, who just 4 years ago, as he pointed out, was the vice presidential nominee of the party, got to be the most popular guy in the state so far tonight.
Absolutely, Gwen. You know, Paul Ryan has had a very interesting and complicated relationship with Donald Trump. As he says, they represent the two wings of the Republican Party. Paul Ryan has also taken issue with many of the statements and positions that Donald Trump has taken in the course of the campaign. Most notably his call to ban Muslims from entering the country, as well as his rhetoric in this campaign. And what you heard tonight is the Paul Ryan that Republicans know on Capitol Hill. He struck a positive tone. He talked about ideas. What he didn't really talk about was Donald Trump. What he did talk about was Hillary Clinton. And like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell before him, they really shaped their remarks around being against Hillary Clinton, against progressivism, against liberalism, and that the party needs to unite.
In this election, Sue, it sounded like he was almost sounding like a cheerleader. He was saying, we can do this. We can be united. We can turn this thing around. We've had a rocky year. It was a pretty remarkable speech.
It wasn't, you know, Paul Ryan understands the political tactics of this. If Donald Trump can't win Republicans in states like Wisconsin, in states like Ohio, in states like Florida, Republicans don't have a chance at the White House. Paul Ryan has said before, even before he took the speakership, he is trying to grow the tent of the Republican Party. He wants more Hispanics, he wants more African Americans, he wants more women, and he's trying to speak to them. And you know, whether or not they can get them into the fold, that is a huge question of this election. But Paul Ryan believes that, and I think he's trying to have a more expansive message for the party.
But delivered so little. We have Sue Davis fighting against Kevin McCarthy behind her, giving a speech, trying to be heard. So we're going to let her do that. In fact, listen ourselves for just a few moments to Kevin McCarthy.
The empowerment of Iran and the rise of ISIS. Republicans have a better way. We have a plan to fix it. In our Republican agenda, our enemies will fear us. Our taxes will be fairer. People will be able to afford the health care they want. The people's voice will be heard. Government will help those who truly need it, and it will allow everyone to rise. So to those that are left behind by economic forces out of your control, we hear you. To those who are attacked for your beliefs, we hear you. To a nation that sees chaos spreading across America and across that globe, we hear you. And for our men and women in uniform, we hear you. Now, as a matter of principle, you will have the very best America has to offer. Those who have fought in the front lines should never have to wait in line. There is a better way, but this Republican agenda can only be realized if we disrupt the status quo. And let's admit, Hillary Clinton is the definition of status quo. We need a leader who shapes the future. The Democrats won't bring the future because they are stuck in the past. When innovation has brought more power to the people, Democrats want more power for Washington. When innovation advances technology, Hillary Clinton uses it to put American secrets at risk. This is not the path for our country. In these difficult times, I remember the words of President Ronald Reagan when he described America as that shining city upon the hill. Together, electing a Republican Congress, Donald Trump, Mike Pence, we can build a better America and make that shining city on the hill bright again. Thank you, and God bless America.
Listening to Congressman Kevin McCarthy of California, who is in the House leadership. I guess this is a chance for just a moment here to look at, we've just heard from 3 congressional leaders in a row. One of them got better response than the other one did, and Speaker Paul Ryan, but there were boos for Mitch McConnell. Kevin McCarthy, you know, his speech was short.
We have Governor Chris Christie getting on stage right now.
Well, we don't want to cut it. We want to hear what he has to say.
We want to hear what he has to say, so here he comes. We, of course, know he's one of the many people Donald Trump defeated in this election.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm here tonight not only as the governor of New Jersey, but also as Donald Trump's friend for the last 14 years. We are about to be led by not only a strong leader, but by a caring, genuine, and decent person. I'm proud to say that the voice of the people of our nation is being heard in this hall tonight, and those voices want Donald Trump to be the next president of the United States. But everybody, this election is not just about Donald Trump. No, it's also about his Democratic opponent, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, in the past few weeks, we've seen the Justice Department refuse to prosecute her. Over the last 8 years, we've seen this administration refuse to hold her accountable for her dismal record as Secretary of State. So let's do something fun tonight. Tonight, as a former federal prosecutor, I welcome the opportunity to hold Hillary Rodham Clinton accountable for her performance and her character. Now, all right, we're getting there. Give me a few more minutes, we'll get there. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to present the facts to you. You, tonight, sitting as a jury of her peers, both in this hall and in your living rooms around our nation. You see, since the Justice Department refuses to allow you to render a verdict, I'm going to present the case now on the facts against Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, she was America's chief diplomat, So let's look around the world at the violence and the danger today in every region that has been infected by her flawed judgment. But I'm going to be specific so that you can render your verdict tonight on the basis of the facts. Let's go to North Africa. She was the chief engineer of the disastrous overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya. Libya today, after Hillary Clinton's grand strategy, their economy's in ruins, there's death and violence on the streets, and ISIS is now dominating that country. So I'm going to ask you this. Hillary Clinton, as a failure for ruining Libya and creating a nest for terrorist activity by ISIS, answer me now, is she guilty or not guilty? In Nigeria, Hillary Clinton amazingly fought for 2 years to keep an al-Qaeda affiliate off of the terrorist watch list. Now what happened because of this reckless action by the candidate who is the self-proclaimed champion of women all around the world? These al-Qaeda terrorists abducted hundreds of innocent young women 2 years ago. These schoolgirls are still missing today. And what was the solution from the Obama-Clinton team? A hashtag campaign. So now let's figure it out. Let's decide. Hillary Clinton, as an apologist for an al-Qaeda affiliate in Nigeria, resulting in the capture of innocent young women, is she guilty or not guilty? See, she fights for the wrong people. She never fights for us. She doesn't get the real threats that America faces. So now let's go to China. In China, Hillary Clinton praised the Chinese government for buying our debt to finance Barack Obama's bloated stimulus plan. She was so desperate for Chinese cash, she promised to oppose the Buy American provision in the stimulus bill in exchange for the cash to finance a huge expansion of federal government spending. So, Hillary Clinton, putting big government spending financed by the Chinese ahead of good-paying jobs for middle-class Americans, is she guilty or not guilty? Let's go to Syria. In Syria, imagine this. Imagine this. She called President Assad a reformer. She called Assad a different kind of leader. There's now 400,000 dead. Think about that. 400,000 dead at the hands of the man that Hillary defended. So we must ask this question. Hillary Clinton, as an awful judge of the character of a dictator and butcher in the Middle East, is she guilty or not guilty? Next in Iran, she launched the negotiations that brought about the worst nuclear deal in history. Let me be clear, America and the world are measurably less safe and less respected because of the Iran deal that Hillary helped cut, period. After she launched those negotiations, she became the biggest cheerleader for this agreement in the end. It's a deal that will lead to a nuclear Iran, and Israel that will be less safe and secure, and a much more dangerous Middle East. So let's ask it. Hillary Clinton, as an inept negotiator of the worst nuclear arms deal in American history, is she guilty or not guilty? Next. Next. Oh, believe me, we're not done yet. The indictment is hardly complete. Next, let's go to Russia. She went to the Kremlin on her very first visit and gave them that stupid, symbolic reset button. You know what I think that button should have read? It should have read delete. You know, she's very good at that, by the way. And it should have read delete because she deleted in 4 years the safety and security it took us to build in 40 years. The next year, she said our goal, America's goal, was to strengthen Russia. Strengthen an adversary led by a dictator who dreams of reassembling the old Soviet empire? What an extraordinarily dangerous lack of judgment. So once again, we need to ask, as a flawed evaluator of dictators and failed strategist who has permitted Russia back in as a major player in the Middle East, is Hillary Clinton guilty or not guilty? Now we go to Cuba. Hillary Clinton supported concessions to the Castro brothers and got almost nothing in return for ending the embargo. She supported a deal that didn't even require this murderous regime to return a cop killer, Joanne Chesimard, to face justice. See, I know about this personally. Joanne Chesimard murdered a New Jersey state trooper in cold blood, fled to Cuba, and lives there under Cuban protection to this very day. I want to ask you, how could someone live with their own conscience when you reward a domestic terrorist with continued safety and at the same time betray the family of a fallen police officer waiting for decades for justice for his murder? So let's ask the question. Hillary Clinton, as a coddler of the brutal Castro brothers and betrayer of the family of fallen state trooper Werner Foster and his family, is she guilty or not guilty? Now, finally, here at home, in one of her first decisions as Secretary of State, she set up a private email server in her basement in violation of our national security. Let's face the facts. Hillary Clinton cared more about protecting her own secrets than she cared about protecting America's secrets. And then she lied about it over and over and over again. She said there was no marked classified information on her server. The FBI director said that's untrue. She said that she did not email any classified information. The FBI director says that's untrue. She said all work-related emails were sent back to the State Department. The FBI director said that's not true. So, as to Hillary Clinton, the charge of putting herself ahead of America, guilty or not guilty? I got another question for you. As to Hillary Clinton lying to the American people about her selfish, awful judgment in making our secrets vulnerable, what's your verdict? Guilty or not guilty? Now, time after time after time, the facts, and just the facts, lead you to the same verdict, both around the world and here at home. In Libya and Nigeria, guilty. In China and Syria, in Iran and Russia and Cuba, and here at home for risking America's secrets to keep her own and lying to cover it all up. Her focus group tested persona with no genuineness to be found is a sham, meant to obscure all the facts and leave you able to vote for her. We cannot promote someone to Commander-in-Chief, who has made the world a more violent and dangerous place with every bad judgment she's made. We cannot make the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States someone who has risked America's secrets and lied to the American people about it day after day after day. Here it is, everybody. We didn't disqualify Hillary Clinton to be President of the United States. The facts of her life and career disqualify her. See, I can tell that everybody in this hall agrees with this, but I want to take our last moments here to talk to all of you at home, in your living rooms, sitting there tonight. You're the ones who will decide this election. We have an alternative. We have a man who is unafraid. We have a man who wants to lead us. We have a man who understands the frustrations and the aspirations of our fellow citizens. We have a man who judges people based on their performance, regardless of your gender, your race, your ethnic or religious background. I implore you, we do not need to settle for less in this election. We cannot reward incompetence and deceit. We need to demand more than what Hillary Clinton offers for America. Because see, we know exactly what 4 years of Hillary Clinton will bring. All the failures of the Obama years, but with less charm and more lies. Tonight, those of us in this hall and the people at home, it is our obligation to stop Hillary Clinton now and never let her get within 10 miles of the White House again. It is time to come together and make sure that Donald Trump is the next president of the United States. I am proud to be part of this team. Now let's go out and win this thing together. Let's go get him. Good night.
Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, bringing this crowd to its feet. Yes, to cheer Donald Trump and to cheer Christie, but also to denounce Hillary Clinton in no uncertain terms, lock her up, a chorus of guilty, guilty, guilty after every issue heard by raised by Chris Christie. Now this is one of Donald Trump's.
Go ahead. I was just going to say you wouldn't know this is tonight about jobs.
No.
Tiffany Trump.
So much. It's so amazing to be with you tonight and say a few words about my father and your nominee for president. Please excuse me if I'm a little nervous. When I graduated college a couple of months ago, I never expected to be here tonight addressing the nation. I've given a few speeches in front of classrooms of students, but never in an arena with more than 10 million people watching. But, like my father, I never back down from challenges. So here I am, a little new to the convention scene, but incredibly honored and very confident in the good man that America is coming to know. It's often said that with enough effort and determination, you can do whatever you put your mind to. But saying those words and living them are different things, and my father has lived them. It's one of his defining qualities, and I've seen it in action all of my life. Whatever he does, he gives his all and does it well. His desire for excellence is contagious. He possesses a unique gift for bringing that trait out in others, starting with those closest to him. He's always helped me be the best version of myself. By encouragement and by example, he motivates me to work my hardest and to always stay true to who I am and what I believe. That's what he does. He draws out the talent and drive in people so that they can achieve their full potential. That's a great quality to have in a father, and better yet, in the President of the United States. As a recent college graduate, many of my accomplishments are still to come. But my dad takes such pride in all that I've done so far, no matter how big or how small. I still keep all of my report cards, some dating back to kindergarten, because I like to look back and see the sweet notes he wrote on each and every one of them. Contrary to what you might expect from someone who places an emphasis on results, my dad's comments referred often to the sentiments expressed by my teachers about how I acted in and out of the classroom, just not even focusing on the letter grades themselves. Donald Trump has never done anything halfway, least of all as a parent. My father always asked about my family in Georgia to make sure that they are healthy and safe. My uncle served in Vietnam, and my 97-year-old great-grandfather served in World War II. I believe the measure of a person is revealed in their darkest times. For me, the measure of a parent is based on how they support and bolster you when you're down. A few years ago, someone very dear to me passed away, and the first call I got, as I knew I would, came from my father. Without his unwavering support and care for me during such a challenging time, I don't know how I would have made it through. As far too many know, it is the small, loving acts that help an enormous amount in times of grief. My father is good with advice, as you might guess, but he keeps it short, and the takeaway is usually the same: to help us find our own way and our own gifts. If you do what you love, hold nothing back, and never let fear of failure get in the way, then you pretty much figured out the Trump formula. My dad is a natural-born encourager, the last person who will ever tell you to lower your sights or give up your dream. I always look forward to introducing him to my friends, especially the ones with preconceived notions, because they meet a man with natural charm and no facade. In person, my father is so friendly, so considerate, so funny, and so real. My friends walk away with a glimpse of all that he is and all that he means to me, of the strong, protective, kind, endearing man I am so proud to call my father. I never pictured myself saying all of this to a packed arena, but I am grateful and fortunate for the chance. I have admired my father all of my life, and I love him with all my heart. God bless you, and thank you.
Please join me in welcoming Carrie Woolard, General Manager of Trump Winery.
Okay, that's Tara. It was Tiffany Trump, Donald Trump's daughter from his marriage to Marla Maples, who's in the arena tonight. It's very interesting to listen finally to a family member sing her father's praises really warmly. David Brooks, last night we were sitting here and you said that was a missed opportunity for Melania Trump.
Yeah, I thought this was much better. Just to say I love him. It's just sweet. It's a moment between a daughter and a dad, and it feels genuine. And so I thought that was successful. It was certainly totally different than Chris Christie a few seconds before.
Ron Elving?
Well, Chris Christie gave us the most undisguised, unvarnished audition for Attorney General that I think we have ever witnessed at a convention. It's a consolation prize for Chris, of course, because he had hoped to be on the ticket with Donald Trump as the running mate, but he certainly showed enthusiasm for that consolation prize tonight.
Well, it certainly was the ultimate prosecutor's role that Chris Christie played tonight. All right, we are going to listen to Carrie Woolard. She happens to be the person who runs the Trump
we're going to go to a break, I believe.
But right now, we are going to go to a short break. This is special PBS NewsHour and NPR coverage of the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Stay with us.
Funding for this program is provided by
XQ Institute.
BNSF Railway. Lincoln Financial, committed to helping you take charge of your financial future. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Reliable, balanced, real. Election 2016 on PBS.
Good evening. I'm Hari Srinivasan with an update on the day's non-convention news. The White House released an open letter from President Obama to law enforcement officers pledging support after the recent killings of police. He told them, quote, "We have your backs." In recent days, 8 officers have been gunned down in Dallas and Baton Rouge. The Islamic State claimed responsibility today for last night's axe and knife attack on a train in southern Germany. 5 people were wounded. The 17-year-old attacker, an Afghan asylum seeker, was shot dead by police. Investigators today found a hand-painted ISIS flag in his room and said he appeared to be self-radicalized. And it's reported tonight that Fox News chair and CEO Roger Ailes will be forced out amid allegations of sexual harassment. The New York Times says buyout talks are in the advanced stages. Former Fox anchor Gretchen Carlson has sued Ailes, accusing him of making advances and then firing her when she complained, a claim he denies.
Up, Gretchen.
There's some rumors.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us, this is live coverage of the Republican National Convention from NPR and the PBS NewsHour. I'm Gwen Eiffel.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. We are all here. We've been listening to Donald Trump's daughter, and I guess during this little interlude, we heard from the woman who runs the Trump Winery, a successful business on this night. Amy Walter, when we're supposed to be hearing about business, about jobs, and
that's what I was going to say.
Economy.
We have not heard. This was Make America Work Again, and we've heard very little about a jobs plan or an economic plan or an agenda in any way, shape, or form that would work on the economy. We've heard a lot of bashing of Hillary Clinton. We heard more chants of lock her up than we've heard about economic plans.
Mark Shields, how about that Chris Christie?
Well, Chris Christie, first just a quick word about Tiffany Trump. I thought that worked. I mean, she's just a recent college graduate. I mean, we were curious to find out about Donald Trump, and she did talk about him. She said he always helps me to be the best version of myself, and she spoke of loving him. Melania Trump last night referred to her husband as Donald J. Trump. I mean, it was, you know, wasn't cutie or lammy pie or anything of the sort. I thought this was the most personal endorsement. And contrast that with Chris Christie, who said had been a friend for 14 years, and then spent 6 sentences on Donald Trump and 43 paragraphs excoriating Hillary Clinton. That's kind of been the balance of this convention. Maybe 6 sentences to 43 paragraphs.
Well, we have heard from one of the Trump children, and we are told another Trump child, and that is his oldest, Donald Trump Jr., is going to be coming to the stage. Maybe they aren't. The music sounds to me like it's continuing, and we may not hear from him. But David, well, he is, so let's stop talking and listen.
Good evening. I'm Donald Trump Jr. Thank you. Thank you. I'm the father of 5 young children, from 2-year-old Chloe to Kai, who just turned 9. I'm the husband to Vanessa, an amazing wife and mother, and the son of a great man. I'm an American. And tonight I want to talk to you about the country we live in, the country our children will grow up in. For my generation, this is the most important election of our lifetime, one that will determine the future of our country, and in turn, the future of the world. For too long, our country has ignored its problems, punting them down the road for future generations to deal with. In business, I was trained by my father to make the tough investments and decisions today to ensure a brighter future tomorrow. We've actually started to believe that solving our great problems is an impossible task. And that's why we need to elect a man who has a track record of accomplishing the impossible. For the first time, parents no longer think that their kids will be as well off as we were. We've lost the confidence in our leaders and the faith in our institutions. But remember one thing, we're still Americans. We're still one country. And we're gonna get it all back. We're gonna get it back better than ever before. I know we'll get it back because I know my father. I know that when people tell him it can't be done, that guarantees that he gets it done. I know that when someone tells him that something is impossible, that's what triggers him into action. When people told him it was impossible for a boy from Queens to go to Manhattan and take on developers in the big city, rather than give up, he changed the skyline of New York. I've seen it time and time again, that look in his eyes when someone says it can't be done. I saw that look a little over a year ago when he was told he couldn't possibly succeed in politics. Yes, he did. For my father, impossible is just the starting point. That's how he approaches business projects. That's how he approaches life. Whether it's teaching his granddaughter how to swing a golf club or tackling the toughest negotiations, he's always fully committed. That's why the person who had never run for office before stood on the stage 11 months ago in this very arena with 16 professional politicians. And this week, that same man will stand before you as our party's nominee for the President of the United States of America. As a proud son and family member, it was one of the great honors of my life to be able to put him over the top in the delegate count earlier today. His unrelenting determination is why he's going to become our next president, and why I know that when my father says he can fix the country, he means it. You want to know what kind of president he'll be? Let me tell you how he ran his businesses. And I know, because I was there with him, by his side, on job sites, in conference rooms, from the time I could walk. He didn't hide out behind some desk in an executive suite. He spent his career with regular Americans. He hung out with the guys on construction sites, pouring sheetrock and pouring concrete and hanging sheetrock. He listened to them, and he valued their opinions as much and often more than the guys from Harvard and Wharton, locked away in offices away from the real work. He's recognized the talent and the drive that all Americans have. He's promoted people based on their character, their street smarts, and their work ethic, not simply paper credentials. To this day, many of the top executives in our company are individuals that started out in positions that were blue collar, but he saw something in them and he pushed them to succeed. His true gift as a leader is that he sees the potential in people that they don't even see in themselves. The potential that other executives would overlook because their resumes don't include the names of fancy colleges and degrees. I know he values those workers and those qualities in people because those are the individuals he had my siblings and me work under when we started out. That he would trust his own children's formative years to these men and women says all you need to know about Donald Trump. We didn't learn from MBAs. We learned from people who had doctorates in common sense. Guys like Vinny Stelio, who taught us how to drive heavy equipment, operate tractors and chainsaws, who worked his way through the ranks to become a trusted advisor of my father. It's why we're the only children of billionaires as comfortable in a D10 Caterpillar as we are in our own cars. My father knew that those were the guys and gals that would teach us the dignity of hard work from a very young age. He knows that at the heart of the American dream is the idea that whoever we are, wherever we're from, we can get ahead, where everyone can prosper together. The other party also tells us they believe in the American dream. They say we should worry about economic inequality and immobility. You know what? They're right. But they don't tell you that it was their policies that caused the problem, and it was their policies that have no accountability. They gave us the worst immigration system in the world, one that imports immobility, one that drives down employment and wages for Hispanic Americans, for African Americans, and for everyone. An immigration system that favors illegals over those trying to go through the process legally. And at times, even over law-abiding citizens. It was Bernie Sanders himself who warned that a large tide of new workers keeps wages low and poverty high. The other party gave us public schools that far too often fail our students, especially those who have no options. Growing up, my siblings and I, we were truly fortunate to have choices and options that others don't have. We want all Americans to have those same opportunities. Our schools used to be an elevator to the middle class. Now they're stalled on the ground floor. They're like Soviet-era department stores that are run for the benefit of the clerks and not the customers, for the teachers and the administrators and not the students. You know why other countries do better on K through 12? They let parents choose where to send their own children to school. That's called competition. It's called the free market. And it's what the other party fears. They fear it because they're more concerned about protecting the jobs of tenured teachers than serving the students in desperate need of a good education. They want to run everything top down from Washington. They tell us they're the experts and they know what's best. The other party gave us a regulatory state on steroids. Dodd-Frank was 1,000 pages long, and it's already spun off 22,000 pages in regulations. Imagine trying to digest all that before you even open your doors for business. That doesn't help consumers. What it does is destroy small business in favor of big businesses who can afford the vast number of lawyers and accountants needed to comply. Dodd-Frank is consumer protection for billionaires. We've produced the thickest network of patronage and influence of any country at any time in world history. It's composed of the self-satisfied people at the top, our new aristocrats. We can't live that way any longer. It's too risky. Let me talk a little bit about risks. The other party is the party of risk. I've spent many time with many great Americans who have served this country in the military, and they know what's at stake. When we have weak leaders in positions of power, Americans risking their lives for our freedoms are less safe. You know, almost daily I get a call or a text from a real American hero. His name's Mark Geist, and I'm proud to call him a friend. Mark was part of the security team at the annex on our grounds of the consulate in Benghazi. Mark was one of the men who received frantic phone calls from his buddies at the compound, calls that pleaded for help, calls that he and his team tried to answer, but calls that didn't save all his friends, because Secretary Clinton's State Department had ignored their requests for help, both on the night in question and even in the weeks and months leading up to the attack. It was a tragedy, and one that would be repeated were she to win the election. Ask Mark who's fit to lead, who has the judgment to lead, who will take that call at 3 o'clock in the morning yet? You know, or better yet, ask yourselves, if you were in Mark's shoes that night, Who would you rather call? Let me tell you something about risk. If Hillary Clinton were elected, she'd be the first president who couldn't pass a basic background check. It's incredible. Hillary Clinton is a risk Americans can't afford to take. She says she'll issue executive orders to take away Americans' guns. She wants to appoint judges who will abolish the Second Amendment. Okay. Just look at how effective those laws have been in inner city Chicago, a city with the toughest gun laws in our nation, where 70 people were murdered last month alone, and where over 3,400 American lives have been lost since this administration took office in 2009. You know why those laws fail? Because criminals, by definition, don't follow laws. Rather than prosecuting real criminals, she would strip hard-working, law-abiding citizens of their rights to protect themselves and their families. She'll throw every possible obstacle in the path of safe, reliable, affordable energy produced in America, by Americans, for American businesses and families. Rather than being energy independent, our country will be forced to remain beholden to her buddies in the Middle East. Those are risks we can't afford to take. And when we win, we're not going to have to. There's so much work to do. We will not accept the current state of our country because it's too hard to change. That's not the America I know. We're going to unleash the creative spirit and energy of all Americans. We're going to make our schools the best in the world for every single American of every single ethnicity and background. We're going to put Americans first, all Americans, not a special class of crony elites at the top of the heap. We're going to elect a president who will work with everyone to pass legislation that will make our country great again. A president who will give us a tax code that will free the American economy and end special loopholes for the wealthy. A president who will give us an immigration law that protects American citizens and gives them jobs. A president who will repeal and replace Obamacare without leaving our most vulnerable citizens without health care, and who will do it without destroying Medicare for seniors, as Hillary Clinton has proposed. A president who knows we can't simply delete our problems, but that we have to tackle them head on. A president who won't allow PC culture to put the safety and well-being of our children and our loved ones at stake. A president who won't bow and pander to nations that shudder at the very thought of America's existence. A president more concerned with the safety and comfort of his fellow Americans than the feelings of those hostile nations abroad who, if given the option, would wipe America off the face of this earth. A president not beholden to special interests, foreign and domestic, and one who funded his entire primary run out of his own pocket just to prove it. A president who will secure and defend the borders of the United States and who will appoint judges who believe that freedom requires a limited government. A president who won't use the highest office in the land as a path to personal enrichment. A president who's actually created real jobs, who has actually signed the front of a paycheck, and who doesn't just talk about it in theory. A president who has real people's families and livelihoods dependent on his success and the success of his company for decades. A president who speaks his mind, and not just when it behooves him to do so, who doesn't have to run a focus group or use data analytics to be able to form a simple opinion. Who says what needs to be said and not just what you want to hear. A president who will unleash the greatness in our nation and in all of us, who will give the hardworking men and women who built this great country a voice once again. That president can only be my mentor, my best friend, my father, Donald Trump. And when we elect him, we'll have done all that. We'll have made America great again, greater than ever before. Thank you, and God bless.
Donald Trump Jr. completing the trifecta. Was it 3 Trump children tonight? 2 Trump children tonight. Coming out to say how wonderful their father is, and also to talk a little bit about policy. We're joined by Domenico Montanaro of NPR, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report, Mark Shields of the PBS NewsHour, and David Brooks of the New York Times. Domenico, what did you think of the speech of Donald Trump Jr.?
Well, if you were wondering which child is into this campaign, I mean, there you go. Donald Trump Jr. brought a lot of energy, a lot of policy, frankly. One of the most policy-heavy speeches of the night, maybe second to Paul Ryan's speech tonight. So not a lot, again, of like anecdotes or touchy-feely stuff. That's not what this was about. It was much more like you would hear from like a campaign strategist building, values of the country, more of a kind of traditional Republican values speech, talking against things like regulations, in favor of school vouchers and against public education.
And very much making a case against Hillary Clinton, Mark Shields. We heard Donald Trump Jr. say would be the first president who couldn't pass a background check.
No, it was a very political speech, far more political than expected, quite frankly. He was nervous at the outset, and I thought he grew in confidence as he connected with the crowd. The crowd responded. He became more comfortable. But other than Tiffany Trump, we're still waiting for sort of that personal sense of Dad gets up and, we had pillow fights, or he was always, went to him in the middle of the night in the storm. You just don't have that.
You're thinking about what your children would say, Mark, I believe. Amy?
Amy would say.
Amy Walter,
we had
that
pillow
is?
fights and concussions.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have any of all of that to say, but look, I thought he was a very strong surrogate for his father and made a very strong case for his candidacy, probably more coherent than many of the speakers who's come before him, and just in the way he was able to package all of that together. I agree, he didn't give many anecdotes, but he still made a very strong case, both for his father, and I agree with Domenico, for a conservative message. And in fact, when you look at the Twitter right now, what you're seeing from a lot of conservatives who are in the Never Trump movement or who say they don't like Donald Trump, they liked this speech because to them it sounded like the kind of speech that a Mitt Romney in 2012 or a more traditional conservative would have given.
And what is that? What is that strain of conservatism, David, that would respond to Donald Trump?
Well, he mentioned limited government, which we haven't heard too much about, which is the traditional theme. It should be said, we've had a string of politicians, and the 2 best speeches of the night were by the 2 Trump children, who are not professional speech makers. But they did have some conviction. Tiffany had the love and an actual affection, a sincere affection for her dad. And Donald Trump Jr. warned us against rule by people who went to Wharton Business School. Now, it happens that his father happened to go to Wharton Business School, but that element of class warfare, that we trust the people who have a doctorate of common sense, that resonates.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you went to fancy private schools. It doesn't matter if your daughter went to Penn and you went to Penn. That's what resonates this year, and that's what the Trump family's bringing us. So I thought the 2 kids were, so far, the story of the night.
Can I say one thing about this Republican convention is we've seen a lot of different faces in the hall, including our Rachel Martin from NPR is on the podium for us tonight, and she caught up with a good Donald Trump friend who's not on the schedule but is in the hall, Don King.
Gwen and Judy, I'm here on the podium with legendary boxing promoter Don King, a Trump supporter. Thank you so much for making time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me.
You have known Donald Trump a very long time. Are you at all surprised that we are here in this moment that he has become the GOP nominee?
Well, the people made Donald Trump the GOP nominee, not the GOP. You got to understand that. This is the voice of the people. And I support Donald because he says, we will create a whole new system. We will tear this system apart. America first. I want to make America great again. That's the essence of it all. To give the white woman her rights, which she doesn't have. And so what the system is creating a new system, and people of color, they don't have their rights. So what he is doing, in the essence, if we create a new system, it one of inclusiveness, not one of being excluded. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's
but
the
you
essence.
know some of his rhetoric has not been as inclusive as many people had wanted it to be. Do you think he needs to change what he is saying in the general election in order to bring in more people, in order to bring in particular, minority voters?
Yes, because the voice of the people. Remember, he brought out all of the different racist points of view. So they say he's a polarizer. He's not a polarizer, he's an exposer. He's already, it's evident, it's self-evident that race relations is the worst they have been in 100 years.
So you're saying he hasn't stirred up race relations, he has just exposed them?
This is how you do. Create a whole new system.
Don King, the boxing promoter, Domenico Montanaro of NPR.
Yes,
what are you going to say? We're looking at you.
Well, I mean, we got Don King out there. Don King is somebody who, Trump has known since his Vegas days, and that's kind of a lot of how Donald Trump's connections work. A lot of the people you've seen on stage here, not a lot of them I'd call A-list celebrities or anything like that, but you've got a lot of people who have intersected with Donald Trump, who've benefited in one way or another from financial relationships and the like. And, that's somebody that he can have and point to say, he's going to promote his, the way that he wants to talk about the country.
Amy Walter, this is if not for the Trump children and even people like Don King, even though he was on the stage, this is really this is already the Trump folks trying to tell us more about Donald Trump, and it feels like we know a lot about him because he's been a celebrity for so long.
Well, that part is true, and I don't know what else it is that they want to help show us. I think they wanted to show us the softer side. That's what we heard from the very beginning, from the Trump campaign before this convention started, saying we're going to see the softer side of Donald Trump. I don't know that we've seen much of it, but we've seen maybe a little softening of the edges. But again, I thought the first part of this convention, which was so focused on Hillary Clinton, seemed to be much more about driving up her negatives than trying to softening his unfavorables.
I don't know if there's been like a strategy to it, though. You know what I mean?
It feels like it's just been kind of a big mishmash of a night.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the one driving force that unifies this party.
Yeah.
I mean, even the speeches tonight, this is supposed to be Make America Work night, right? And it's been more about, make Hillary Clinton retire night or something. They don't want her to be the person on stage. You saw Chris Christie deliver a searing indictment of Hillary Clinton's record and who she is. That's really what has been animating this crowd and these voters.
And it makes you wonder if they did a little retweaking of the agenda tonight after some of the difficulties they had today, all the publicity over Melania Trump's speech. Let's listen right now for a little bit to Shelley Moore Capito. She is the Republican senator from the state of West Virginia, where coal mining has been an issue. It's one of the cases they want to prosecute against Hillary Clinton.
Is burdening every household in America with a cost of $15,000 worth more campaign cash? Is burdening every household in America with a cost of $15,000 worth a few more one-liners? Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm sure you agree with me about the importance of this election. One of the reasons this election is so important is because the Democrats have nominated a candidate that Americans overwhelmingly distrust. You know what? She's earned this reputation. Her term at the State Department was shrouded in scandal and mistrust. Just a few weeks ago, FBI director said that Secretary Clinton was negligent. He questioned her judgment and revealed countless ways she has misled the American people. We know that the cornerstone of our global leadership is not just our awesome military, it's not just our economic power, but it's our credibility. She has squandered Americans' trust. And thankfully, the latest misdeed hasn't slipped past the attention of the American people. Recent polls show that voters' distrust of Hillary was deteriorating her support. So it does come down to trust. She can't be trusted with classified information or trusted to play by the same rules that you and I play by. And without trust, we cannot feel safe and we cannot thrive. No one who has lost the trust of the American people should ever serve as our president. The only thing we can trust Hillary to do is to double down on the same failed Obama policies that are hurting Americans that I just described. We know she will double down on an economic agenda that's led to the lowest workforce participation in decades. We know that she will double down on the war on coal. We know that she will double down on Obamacare. We know that she will double down on far-left Supreme Court nominees. We know that she will double down on the catastrophic foreign policy that she herself has orchestrated. The contrast between our vision for the future and that of Hillary Clinton is clear. Now is the time to turn the tide. Are you with me? Let's turn the tide so that unelected bureaucrats no longer mandate regulations that are disconnected from the realities of working Americans. Let's turn the tide from an executive who promotes radical environmental agenda that raises the cost across this country. Let's turn the tide from a Washington that tells us who our doctors are and delivers a lower quality of care. Let's turn the tide to a government that respects the Constitution and protects jobs and the way of life of rural America. This is not out of reach. We can make these visions a reality. This week, we'll officially nominate a candidate who received the most primary votes in the history of our party. A candidate who understands how to create jobs and grow the economy. Our party wants to allow businesses to create jobs, not regulate jobs out of existence. Our party understands the free market and doesn't try to control it. Our party stands up for hard-working Americans like my hard-working West Virginia coal miners. Our party will strengthen our military to face growing threats. We must carry this momentum to elect Donald Trump, who speaks directly to Americans who have been devastated by the Obama administration. West Virginians know he understands their problems, shares their concerns, and by golly is going to do things much differently. The American people know that Hillary Clinton has forfeited her trust and has broken her bond with working Americans. So let's commit tonight to bringing our country together. In the months ahead, the stakes are both clear and high. Take this energy from this convention back to your state, back to your home, and work to elect Donald Trump, who will make America great again. Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming Dr.
The delegates, some of them coming to the floor, are standing up, cheering on Shelley Moore Capito, the senator we described from West Virginia, followed immediately by the neurosurgeon from Baltimore, who was running for president, dropped out pretty early and almost immediately turned around and endorsed Donald Trump.
I'm sorry, as you can tell from the welcome he's receiving, Judy, he still has a support base here in the Republican Party. It's easy to remember there was a time when Ben Carson actually was leading the polls. And he looks pretty happy to be back in front of that microphone again.
All right. Don't eat up my time. Thank you. I want to thank you all for that very warm welcome. I have to start out by saying one very important thing. I'm not politically correct. And I hate political correctness because it's antithetical to the founding principles of this country. And the secular progressives use it to make people sit down and shut up while they change everything. It's time for us to stand up and shout out about what we believe in. You know, I devoted my career to studying and operating on the human brain. This remarkable organ defines our humanity. It gives us the ability to not only feel and observe, but to reason. When we elect a president, we need to use that power of reasoning to look at their history, their character, what kind of people they really are. It makes all the difference in the world for us. And it is going to be so critical right now. We must resist the temptation to take the easy way out and to passively accept what is fed to us by the politically elite and the media, because they don't know what they're talking about, but they have an agenda. Now, we must also be wary of the narrative that's being advanced by some in our own party. The notion that a Hillary Clinton administration wouldn't be that bad, the effects would only be temporary. You know, that it would only last for 4 and at most 8 years. They're not using their God-given brain to think about what they're saying, because it won't be 4 or 8 years, because she will be appointing people who will have an effect on us for generations, and America may never recover from that. That's what we have to be thinking about. You know, interestingly enough, we have to start thinking about what would Hillary Clinton do if she was in fact the president. She would appoint Supreme Court justices, she would appoint federal judges, and that would have a deleterious effect on what happens for generations to come. Not only that, but she would continue with a system that denigrates the education of our young people, puts them in a place where they're never going to be able to get a job, where they're always going to be dependent, and where they can therefore be cultivated for their votes. This is not what America is all about, this kind of deception. And this is what we, the people, have the necessary obligation to fight. Now, one of the things that I have learned about Hillary Clinton is that one of her heroes, her mentors, was Saul Alinsky. And her senior thesis was about Saul Alinsky. This was someone that she greatly admired and that affected all of her philosophies subsequently. Now, interestingly enough, let me tell you something about Saul Alinsky. He wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. On the dedication page, it acknowledges Lucifer, the original radical who gained his own kingdom. Now, think about that. This is a nation where our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, talks about certain inalienable rights that come from our Creator. This is a nation where our Pledge of Allegiance says we are one nation under God. This is a nation. This is a nation where every coin in our pocket and every bill in our wallet says, "In God we trust." So are we willing to elect someone as president who has as their role model somebody who acknowledges Lucifer? Think about that. The secular progressive agenda is antithetical to the principles of the founding of this nation. And if we continue to allow them to take God out of our lives, God will remove himself from us. We will not be blessed, and our nation will go down the tubes. And we will be responsible for that. We don't want that to happen. Now, Donald Trump, he understands this very well. He understands that the blessings of this nation come with the responsibility to ensure that they are available to all, not just the privileged few. This is exemplified by his willingness to take on the establishment against all odds. It is evident in his passion for the American worker. It is found in his desire to put his considerable skills to work on behalf of American interests, not his self-interest. I'm proud to support Donald Trump, an extraordinary businessman, the right leader for a time such as this. But you know what? It is not about Donald Trump. It is not about me. It is about we, the people. And Thomas Jefferson said that we would reach this point because we, the people, would not be paying attention, and it would allow the government to grow, to expand, and to metastasize, and to try to rule us. But he said, before we turn into something else, we, the people, would recognize what was going on, what we were about to lose, and we would rise up and we would take control of our nation. And I say now is the time for us to rise up and take America back.
Well, that's it. Retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson ran for president, got a warm welcome here tonight, and came out with not only an embrace of Donald Trump, who he quickly endorsed, but also a pretty strong assault, as we have seen a lot tonight, on Hillary Clinton. There's another protester in the hall tonight. Usually there's one before they get stopped and then escorted out of the...
Yeah, these are just delegates. Oh boy, we're having a tug of war. A minute ago, we watched two comedians, two men dressed in red, white, and blue sequin dresses. We figured out they were comedians. They were taken out.
You know what that means?
And you're watching this happen here.
We are at a political convention. That's what that's means, right, Mark Shields.
Ben Carson took it to a new level and a different level in the demonizing of Hillary Clinton. He tied her to Saul Alinsky and Lucifer. I mean, that somehow she is a protege, if not a disciple of Lucifer. I mean, this is really, rhetorical excess of a new dimension.
Since it's so loud with the music right now, we want to be able to hear all of you, so we're going to go to an interview that Lisa Desjardins did, that Rachel Martin did, NPR's Rachel Martin did just a few minutes ago.
Gwen and Judy, I'm down here on the podium with the governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson. He just spoke from the stage a few moments ago. Governor, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm delighted to be with you this evening.
It's fair to say you were a latecomer to supporting Donald Trump. What changed your mind?
Well, he won. Was a large part of it. I mean, I supported Marco Rubio, but Donald Trump prevailed in the primaries. And whenever I look at a clear distinction in November between our choices, there's not any doubt that Donald Trump is the best one to lead our country forward. And then it's exciting to see a growing sense of unity and excitement about his campaign, his business sense, and all that he offers the ticket.
He is putting out some ideas about free trade that haven't exactly been in line with long-standing Republican philosophy about how the global economy works. How are you feeling these days about Donald Trump's plans to revisit key trade agreements?
Well, I think he'll be a very tough negotiator, and that's a major message that he has, that we need to be tough in preserving our jobs, but at the same time, I want to encourage him to engage in commerce globally. We want to make sure we continue that international trade. That's very important for Arkansas. So my job is, one, to draw the distinctions. Clearly, he's better. He's the best. But I also want to shape the direction he goes into more of a traditional Republican path in terms of we do want to continue that trade. We just want to make sure that we negotiate the best and the toughest trade agreements we can.
Do you think he can unify this party?
I think he's doing that. The first thing he did was to bring Mike Pence in. That was a unifying act. There's a lot of others that he could have brought in that might be a good showcase, but Mike is steady. He's a strong conservative. He's accepted by our base. So that was a unifying message that he did in taking Mike Pence. I think there's a growing sense here is that this is important. We're going to be engaged in the campaign. He's got to do more, and his speech is important, how he conveys it, to bring our base in terms of energy, but also to broaden our base. And so that's what I'm looking forward in his speech this week.
Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, thank you so much for your time. I'll throw it back to you, Gwen and Judy.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think we're here with our stalwart team. Gwen and I are, Domenico Montanaro, NPR, Amy, Walter, and David and Mark. David, we heard in Governor Hutchinson, I think, the journey of a conservative in some regards. I mean, he's come around to Donald Trump, but you can hear in his explanation that he arrived at his own decision in a unique way.
Honest, it was opportunistic. The guy won, so yeah, my party nominee. I wish he would be a little different on trade, was the subtext of what he just said. And so that's what a lot of people are going through. Whether it's the right call, history will decide. If I can make a point about the nature of the convention tonight, we've had no videos. Donald Trump promised a different kind of convention. If anything, this is more of a throwback convention. With
to be
very
fair, they scheduled a video, but I think tonight they decided they really wanted to stay on time, so they went away.
So we've just had a series of speeches, mostly by professional politicians, not exactly reality TV.
It's been, the entire arc of this campaign seems to have gone from, not this campaign, I'm sorry, these 2 nights of this convention have started slowly, built up to a peak, usually involving a Trump, and then tailed off. Right now there's another, Kimberly Brown, who's a former soap opera star and avocado farmer, who's on the stage, and the hall is emptying out, Mark Shields.
Yeah, you know, I honestly, the sum is less than all of the parts. I mean, you don't walk out of this evening feeling that there's a single message that's been delivered. And there have been pieces, there have been fragments. You can kind of assemble something, but there isn't, to quote Richard Nixon, the dream of an overarching dream, or any kind of real theme to it. I mean, it's been a themeless evening.
I would actually push back a little, Mark. I mean, to me, the theme is against Hillary Clinton. I mean, we had Chris Christie prosecuting her and getting standing on their feet.
Every convention,
lock her up.
Every convention, every political gathering is either we point with pride or we view with alarm. This has been more viewing with alarm and less pointing with pride.
I would also suggest, I agree with Judy a little bit in that we get caught up in the theme idea. But I think people tuning in from home aren't saying, are they talking about jobs tonight? Joe, I think that they're looking to see who's speaking and who is prosecuting the case for the candidate.
Well, what I think you found is tonight and these last couple of days, an evolution of conservatives, kind of coming around to Donald Trump. I was talking with Susan Davis, our colleague, who's been reporting from the floor yesterday, and we were talking about from the floor that there are 3 kinds of people here. There are these never Trump folks, there are the pragmatists, and there are the true believers. And certainly there's a whole lot of true believers on that floor, probably a majority of the delegates. But you're seeing pragmatists, people like Asa Hutchinson, who have been in the past critical of Donald Trump, and you've seen lots of critics sort of roll out to try to bring the party together. Chris Christie, for example, was hotly critical. I mean, remember, there was a point in this campaign when Ben Carson, Donald Trump was up on stage doing, an impersonation of Ben Carson stabbing himself with a knife. Remember that?
Yep,
I mean, this has been a long process, 17 candidates, and you're starting to see some of the pragmatists, anyway, come on board for enough party unity for what they hope in November will be something that gives them a shot at this election.
Amy Walter.
I just think the most interesting thing that Asa Hutchinson said was the importance of Donald Trump in his speech to broaden the base.
Yeah.
And we have spent 2 days with speakers singing to the choir. There has been not one, well, I think there are a couple of candidates or speakers, Paul Ryan, for example, who made the case in his speech he talked about poverty. He talked about the importance of a Republican agenda that
we
sort
saw
of
the
looks
sheriff
beyond
from,
that.
from last night from Wisconsin talking about basically making the case why African Americans should support him.
Right, but making a very conservative case.
Right.
Not one that was inclusive, but much of a bigger, greater, broader audience. And so I don't know that we will see Donald Trump doing that, but if these last 2 days are any indication, it seems like what the campaign is saying is we are doubling, tripling down on the message that got us here, on the campaign strategy that got us here, and that's what we're going to ride all the way till November.
We'd love to go to some of our colleagues on the floor. Maybe one of them is Susan Davis. We just heard Domenico refer to you, Susan. Tell us what you're hearing down there talking to delegates.
You know, one of the things that really struck out tonight is we heard a lot about Hillary Clinton, about defining their opponent, but I also think we heard a lot tonight from congressional leaders and this idea of governing and what's the Republican Party about and where do they want to take this country. One of the big questions is, can this party work together? And between Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan and the Majority Leader, I think they're starting to lay the groundwork to say, we trust us, we can lead this country, and we want to move it in a more conservative direction.
So, Susan, what I wonder about, though, whether this audience, it's hard to tell up here in our booth up in the sky, but I'm very curious whether you can tell us whether the folks on the ground are, they are perfectly satisfied with what we're seeing. We saw a little bit of discontent when Mitch McConnell came out. But who was the person who really got the crowd? My sense is that the Trump children were warmly received, but that was really Chris Christie who got the mood of the place.
It was really Chris Christie. Chris Christie got them on their feet. Paul Ryan got them on their feet. I think we've established that the chant of 2016 is "Lock her up," which is in response to Hillary Clinton and the investigations into her. If you remember, "Build that wall," or "You built that," or "Drill baby drill" of other conventions. The crowd here does feel increasingly fired up. They feel increasingly engaged. You talk to a lot of delegates who are sort of reluctant coming into this convention hall, but this is here to rally the party faithful, and I think that they're little by little every day, and the Trump kids really did impress the crowd.
And how you balance the many.
Thank you, Susan Davis with NPR. Now let's go to Lisa Desjardins with the NewsHour somewhere else on the floor. Lisa.
Hi, guys. I have to disagree a little bit with Sue about Paul Ryan. I actually found the crowd didn't seem to be paying much attention to his every word. At the very end, he did seem to rouse them. I think tonight my takeaways were Chris Christie, the prosecutor, Ben Carson, the minister. That gets you sort of the justice and religion that I think is the backbone of many of the delegates here. But also something we haven't talked about, guys, tonight is who's not in the hall. The Ohio delegation in particular was cheering again and again during the roll call tonight for John Kasich. He is the only person to receive votes for president at this convention who will not be at this convention speaking. And there are many members of Congress not here as well. You can tell by this point in the night, many of the delegates have left. So I think that's a challenge for this party, is to get the folks who are not in this hall tonight on board the Donald Trump train by November.
So Lisa Desjardins, when you see people come out tonight for this, and as we know what we know about what we're going to see tomorrow, who do you think everyone is coming out to see?
I think it's going to be Mike Pence. And even the last two nights, as we've seen Mike Pence in the vice presidential box, he's a known quantity to many evangelicals, even many conservatives. He is not a known quantity in this role. As the potential bulldog, the Trump backer, someone who is more fired up than we'd ever heard him before, I think he's going to be a very big draw. Newt Gingrich also obviously is someone who this crowd knows very well. And from what we've seen when we've tagged along with him in this hall, he's very well loved. So I think those will probably be two of the highlights. The Trump children continue to get a lot of attention. And obviously they get that starring primetime role. That's not an accident. As Amy was saying, they want to make Donald Trump a little more real. And I think Tiffany Trump, for the first time, I heard some personal anecdotes about Donald Trump. If there's more of that, then maybe they'll make this case of making him a more warm-type figure.
Lisa Desjardins, thank you. You make some good points. Coming back to our friends in the Sky booth here, it is the case that we're hearing from almost all the other candidates notably not John Kasich. And Mark Shields, we haven't heard from Ted Cruz. We're told he's going to speak. There were a lot of votes for him. What, Amy, 470 some votes among these delegates for Ted Cruz? Maybe they'll stand up for him.
Ted Cruz has not endorsed.
No, that was fascinating, right? Yeah. When he said that he accepted the speaking slot, he made the point of saying that there was no talk of an endorsement.
Yeah. No.
Which is maybe that means endorsements don't matter, or maybe that
I guess not. I mean, Paul Ryan delivered a speech that was very much a vision speech. So maybe Ted Cruz will lay out.
How can Ted Cruz endorse after what he said about his father? His father fled Castro's Cuba, and then Ted Cruz, on the day of the Indiana primary, Donald Trump accused his father of having been involved in the assassination with Lee Harvey Oswald, President John Kennedy.
And
now, you embrace and endorse somebody like that, even if you love a national audience?
Not to mention Lion Ted.
Yeah.
We also want to hear from Rachel Martin, NPR's Rachel Martin, who's at the podium. What's your take on tonight, Rachel?
Oh, Judy, I was just thinking about the fact that we saw a lot of really heavy hitters tonight. I mean, these are Republican establishment folks, the most establishment that you can get when we talk about the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. When you talk about Chris Christie, you know, he likes to position himself as this independent kind of guy, but he's an office holder, and this is very much the kind of endorsement, the kind of support that he needs in order to do what we've been talking about all night. He needs to unify the party. He needs these people, though, to help him do that. And of course, the speeches from the children really stood out to me. Tiffany Trump giving a kind of a more personal look than we heard even from Melania Trump, and Donald Trump Jr. giving what I thought was an incredibly substantive speech, something you might hear from a member of Congress, but instead it came from someone who perhaps can serve as a better surrogate for Donald Trump. And I thought it was very strong. So we'll see what tomorrow holds. Tomorrow's theme, for what those are worth, is Make America First. So we'll see what that does.
Thank you so much. We have time for, I guess, David Brooks and Amy Walter for final quick thoughts on what to expect for tomorrow. David Brooks.
Well, I'm struck by tonight. I've been going to these things for decades. You build for the final climax right now. You control that last 10 o'clock hour, and those seats are all empty. And I'm struck. My newspaper has a story about what happened to the Melania speech. They commissioned a speech from two of the best Republican speechwriters, Matt Scully and John McConnell, and they threw that speech out.
Yep.
And so you're looking at a campaign. We're not sure who's running that campaign. I look around. I'm not sure they're that good.
Amy Walter, quickly.
Very quickly, I don't know if Mike.
That's the one person everybody agrees on, though.
That he is the good choice. They agree that he's a good choice, and now let's see what kind of candidate he will end up being.
And maybe tomorrow night we'll hear about jobs, and we'll hear about making America work and making America strong.
Or maybe not.
And maybe not. That wraps it up for tonight. We want to thank all of you here with us in the booth, Domenico, Amy, Mark, and David, and my colleague Gwen. That does conclude our special NPR PBS NewsHour coverage of this Republican convention in Cleveland. I'm Judy Woodruff.
And I'm Gwen Eiffel. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night. Thank you, and good night.
Funding for this program is provided by
XQ Institute.
Love me tender.
We can like many, but we can love only a precious few. Because it is for those precious few that you have to be willing to do so very much. But you don't have to do it alone. Lincoln Financial helps you provide for and protect your financial future. Because this is what you do for people you love. Lincoln Financial, you're in charge.
BNSF Railway. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Reliable, balanced, real. Election 2016 on PBS.
For balanced, in-depth reporting you won't find anywhere else. Join us for live coverage of the Democratic National Convention.
Monday at 8/7 Central, only on